A single father, a dying billionaire CEO, and one impossible question whispered at midnight. Am I beautiful? When Daniel Reed opened his door to find his ruthless boss soaking wet, trembling, and hiding from assassins, he never imagined his answer would change both their lives forever. She had months to live. He had nothing but the truth. Watch until the very end to discover how one question saved two broken souls. Drop a comment with your city. Let me see how far this story travels across the world. The rain came down like punishment. It hammered against the windows of Daniel Reed's third-floor apartment with a ferocity that made the old building groan. Lightning cracked across the Chicago skyline, illuminating the modest living room in harsh white flashes before plunging everything back into darkness. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his laptop casting a pale glow across his exhausted face. Spreadsheets, always spreadsheets. The numbers blurred together after 14 hours of staring at them, but he couldn't stop. Not yet. The quarterly report was due Monday morning, and Alexandra Vale didn't accept excuses. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at the clock on the microwave. 11:47 p.m. Down the narrow hallway, his 6-year-old daughter Emma slept in her small bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling. She'd been afraid of thunderstorms since her mother left 3 years ago, just packed a bag one Tuesday afternoon and never came back. But tonight, exhaustion had won. Emma slept through the chaos outside, her breathing soft and steady. Daniel envied her peace. He reached for his coffee mug, found it empty, and sighed. The caffeine had stopped working hours ago anyway. His body ached from sitting too long, and his mind felt like cotton stuffed into a skull 2 sizes too small. Just finish the Henderson analysis, he told himself. Then you can sleep. But sleep felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Not with rent due next week, not with Emma's school fees climbing every semester, not with his position at Vale Industries hanging by a thread after the latest round of layoffs. Daniel Reed was 34 years old, and most days he felt like 60. He'd been a promising financial analyst once, top of his class at Northwestern, recruited by 3 Fortune 500 companies before graduation. He'd chosen Vale Industries because of their mission, developing affordable cardiac technology that could save millions of lives. He believed in that mission. Still did. But somewhere between the corporate politics, the 18-hour days, and the soul-crushing reality of being a single father with no family support, Daniel had become invisible. Just another face in a sea of cubicles. Just another number on a spreadsheet. The irony wasn't lost on him. Lightning struck close enough to rattle the windows and make the lights flicker. Daniel's laptop screen went dark for a terrifying second before the power stabilized. "Come on," he muttered. "Don't do this to me." The document reappeared. His work was saved. Small mercies. He was reaching for the coffee pot to brew another cup he didn't need when he heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps against his front door. Daniel froze, the coffee pot suspended in midair. He looked at the clock again. 11:52 p.m. Nobody knocked on doors at midnight in this neighborhood, not unless they were lost, drunk, or dangerous. Knock, knock, knock. More insistent this time. Daniel set down the coffee pot and moved quietly toward the door. His heart rate climbed with each step. He didn't own a gun, couldn't afford one, didn't want one around Emma anyway, but he grabbed an old baseball bat from the closet near the entrance, a relic from his college days. The wood felt solid in his hands. "Who's there?" he called through the door. No answer. Just the rain, the thunder, the howling wind. Daniel pressed his eye to the peephole. What he saw made no sense. A woman stood in the hallway, soaked to the bone, water streaming from her hair and clothes like she'd walked through a river to get here. Her designer coat, probably worth more than Daniel's car, clung to her frame, ruined beyond repair. Her makeup had run in dark streaks down her cheeks, and she was shaking so violently that Daniel could see her tremors through the distorted lens of the peephole. But it was her face that stopped his breath. He knew that face. Everyone at Vale Industries knew that face. It was plastered on magazine covers, business journals, and the massive portrait in the lobby of their corporate headquarters. Alexandra Vale, CEO. Billionaire. The most powerful woman in Chicago's corporate world. His boss. His boss was standing outside his apartment at midnight, looking like she'd barely survived a hurricane. Daniel's hand trembled as he undid the chain lock. He twisted the deadbolt, pulled open the door. The wind rushed in first, cold and wet, carrying the scent of rain and something else, something metallic. Fear. He could smell her fear. Alexandra Vale looked up at him with eyes that had seen something terrible. Eyes that were usually sharp as surgical steel, cold and calculating, capable of firing 50 employees before lunch and never losing a second of sleep. Those eyes now held something Daniel had never seen in them. Desperation. "Mr. Reed," she whispered. Her voice cracked on his name. "Ms. Vale?" Daniel stepped back instinctively. "What are you... How did you... Please." The word came out broken, barely audible above the storm. "I didn't know where else to go." She swayed on her feet. Daniel dropped the baseball bat and caught her just before she collapsed, her body falling against his chest like a marionette with severed strings. She was ice cold, her skin almost blue, her lips trembling so hard she couldn't speak. Okay. Daniel half carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. "Let's get you warm." He guided her to the couch, the same worn, second-hand couch where Emma liked to watch cartoons on Saturday mornings, and grabbed a blanket from the closet. Alexandra sat there, motionless, staring at nothing while Daniel wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "I'll get you something hot to drink," he said. "Just stay there. Don't move." She didn't respond. Daniel's hand shook as he put the kettle on. His mind raced through 1,000 questions, each more impossible than the last. How did she know where he lived? Why would someone like Alexandra Vale, worth an estimated $3.2 billion according to last year's Forbes list, come to a cramped apartment in a middle-class neighborhood instead of one of her penthouses, her private doctors, her army of personal assistants? What the hell was going on? The kettle whistled. Daniel made tea, chamomile, the only thing he had that might calm someone down, and brought it to the living room. Alexandra hadn't moved. She sat exactly where he'd left her, the blanket around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on some distant point only she could see. Daniel knelt in front of her, holding out the mug. "Ms. Vale, you need to drink something. You're hypothermic." Her gaze shifted slowly, like she was waking from a dream. For the first time, she truly looked at him. Not through him, the way she looked at employees in the elevator. Not past him, the way she looked at everyone who wasn't worth her time. She looked at him. "Daniel," she said softly. "Your name is Daniel." "Yes, ma'am." "You work in financial analysis, 3rd floor, cubicle near the window." He blinked, surprised. Yes. How did you... I know everyone who works for me." Her voice was steadier now, though still fragile. She reached for the mug, her fingers brushing against his. Her hands were like ice. "I know you've been with the company for 7 years. I know you're raising your daughter alone. I know you stay late every night because you're terrified of being let go in the next round of cuts." Daniel didn't know what to say. He'd assumed he was invisible to someone like her. He'd assumed wrong. Alexandra took a small sip of tea, then another. Some color began returning to her cheeks. "Ms. Vale," Daniel said carefully, "why are you here?" She was quiet for a long moment. The storm raged outside, rain lashing the windows, thunder rolling across the city like the world itself was angry. Then she looked at him with those impossible eyes, green, he realized now, not gray like they appeared in photographs, and asked a question that made no sense. "Am I beautiful?" Daniel stared at her. "What? Am I beautiful, Daniel?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Tell me the truth. Not what you think I want to hear. Not what an employee should say to his boss. The truth." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He'd seen Alexandra Vale from a distance countless times. At company meetings, striding across the stage with the confidence of someone who owned the room, because she did. In the elevator, her presence so commanding that everyone else shrank against the walls. On television, giving interviews about Vale Industries' latest breakthrough in cardiac technology. She was striking, elegant, powerful, the kind of woman who made magazine covers look effortless. But beautiful? Beautiful was a human word, and Alexandra Vale had never seemed quite human. Until now. Now, sitting on his second-hand couch with mascara streaming down her face and her billion-dollar armor stripped away, she looked achingly, heartbreakingly human. Vulnerable in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. "Why are you asking me that?" he said quietly. Alexandra's eyes glistened. She looked away, toward the window, toward the storm. "Because I needed to ask someone who would tell me the truth," she said. "And you're the only person I know who isn't trying to take something from me." Before Daniel could respond, her phone rang. The sound was jarring, a sharp, clinical tone that cut through the thunder like a scalpel. Alexandra fumbled for the device, nearly dropping it with her trembling hands. She looked at the screen, and all the color that had returned to her face drained away. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She answered the call. "This is Alexandra Vale." Daniel watched her listen, watched her face transform from fear to devastation, watched her grip the phone so hard her knuckles went white. "When?" she asked. Her voice was flat. "Dead." "How long do I have?" Daniel's stomach dropped. "How long do I have?" Alexandra ended the call without saying goodbye. She sat motionless for a moment, the phone dark in her hand, her expression unreadable. Then she began to cry. Not the delicate, dignified tears Daniel might have expected from someone of her stature. These were raw, ugly sobs that racked her entire body, the kind of crying that comes from a place beyond pride, beyond control, beyond hope. Daniel didn't think. He moved to the couch and sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence but not touching her. Not yet. He'd learned with Emma that sometimes the most comforting thing wasn't contact, it was simply being there. "Ms. Vale," he said gently, "talk to me. What's happening?" It took her several minutes to compose herself enough to speak. When she finally did, her voice was raw, scraped clean of all the polish and power that usually defined it. "I'm dying, Daniel." The words hung in the air between them. "What?" "I have a congenital heart defect. I've known about it since I was 16. The doctors said I probably wouldn't live past 30. She laughed bitterly. "I'm 42. I've been living on borrowed time for 12 years, but the bill just came due." Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. He gripped the arm of the couch to steady himself. "That call was from my cardiologist," Alexandra continued. "My condition has deteriorated rapidly over the past month. He's been trying to reach me all day, but I couldn't answer. I was too afraid." She pressed her hand to her chest as if she could feel her heart failing inside her. "Without intervention, I have maybe 3 months, probably less." "But there must be something they can do," Daniel said. "Surgery, medication. You have access to the best doctors in the world." "There is one option." Alexandra's voice was bitter. "An experimental procedure. Dr. Harrison at Northwestern has been developing a new technique using stem cells and artificial tissue scaffolding. It's never been done on a human patient. The risk of death during the procedure is approximately 40%. 40%? And even if I survive, the recovery would take at least 6 months. 6 months where I can't run my company. 6 months where I'm vulnerable. Weak." She spat the word like a curse. "Do you know what happens to a company when its CEO disappears for 6 months, Daniel?" Daniel thought about the politics he'd witnessed at Vale Industries. The backstabbing, the power plays, the way certain executives circled any sign of weakness like sharks scenting blood. "Grant Mercer happens," he said quietly. Alexandra looked at him sharply. "You know about Grant?" "Everyone knows about Grant. He's been positioning himself for your job since the day you hired him." He's more than positioning." Alexandra's jaw tightened. "He's been actively undermining me for months, cultivating relationships with board members, planting stories in the business press about my erratic behavior, creating the narrative that I'm unfit to lead." She paused. "He doesn't know I'm sick. Nobody does. But somehow he knows I'm vulnerable, and he's circling." The pieces began falling into place in Daniel's mind. "That's why you're here. You couldn't go to your usual places, your homes, your staff. Someone might be watching." "Someone is watching." Alexandra's voice dropped. "Tonight, on my way back from Dr. Harrison's office, I noticed a car following me. I thought I was being paranoid. I told my driver, Marcus, to take an alternate route. We lost them, or I thought we did. Her hands began shaking again. When we stopped at a red light, someone attacked Marcus. Just came out of nowhere and smashed through the driver's side window. I ran, and I kept running, and I didn't know where to go because every place I could think of was a place they could find me. Who's they? I don't know. That's what terrifies me. She looked at him with haunted eyes. I'm one of the most protected people in this city, Daniel. I have security teams, surveillance systems, an entire infrastructure designed to keep me safe. And tonight, I was nearly killed on a public street. Daniel's mind raced. How did you end up here? My address isn't exactly common knowledge. I pulled your personnel file months ago, when I noticed you staying late every night, when I saw you sleeping at your desk because you were too exhausted to drive home. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I was going to fire you, actually. I thought you were inefficient, couldn't manage your workload. Then I did some digging and realized you were doing the work of 3 people because Grant had quietly reassigned 2 of your team members without your knowledge or mine. Daniel felt a cold anger settle in his stomach. He did what? He's been sabotaging employees he sees as threats. Anyone smart enough to recognize what he's doing. Anyone loyal enough to me to cause problems. Alexandra met his eyes. You're on his list, Daniel. You don't know it yet, but you are. He's planning to eliminate your position in the next restructuring. How do you know all this? Because tonight, before everything fell apart, I finally got access to his private communications. He's been using encrypted channels to communicate with board members, with rivals, with... She stopped, drew a sharp breath. With my doctor. The implication hit Daniel like a physical blow. Your doctor? You mean... I mean Grant Mercer knows I'm dying. He's known for weeks, maybe longer. Alexandra's voice cracked. My own cardiologist has been feeding him information, test results, prognosis, treatment options, everything. Jesus Christ. I don't know how deep the conspiracy goes. I don't know who I can trust. My security team could be compromised. My household staff, my board of directors. She looked at Daniel with an expression that nearly broke him, equal parts terror and defiance. So I came to the only person I could think of who has nothing to gain from my death and everything to lose from Grant Mercer's rise. Me, Daniel said. You came to me. You have a daughter to protect, a job to keep, a life that depends on Vale Industries surviving and thriving. Alexandra reached out and touched his hand, a feather-light brush of frozen fingers. If Grant takes over, he'll sell our cardiac technology to the highest bidder. The affordable heart monitors we've been developing, the accessible treatment protocols, gone, shelved, turned into luxury products for the wealthy while everyone else dies waiting for care they can't afford. Daniel thought about his mother. She died of a heart attack when he was 23, too young to have the insurance that would have covered the tests that could have caught her condition in time. He'd watched her struggle with chest pain for months, unable to afford the specialists who might have saved her. That was why he'd chosen Vale Industries. That was why he'd believed in their mission. What do you need from me? He asked. Alexandra studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his face. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because some of the tension eased from her shoulders. Tonight, I need somewhere safe to sleep. Tomorrow, she trailed off. Tomorrow, I need to figure out how to stay alive long enough to save my company. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay. Okay? You can stay here. I'll take the couch. Emma's room is at the end of the hall. She's a deep sleeper. She won't wake up. The bedroom door locks from the inside. He stood, running a hand through his hair. It's not much, but it's more than enough. Alexandra's voice softened. Thank you, Daniel. He helped her to the bedroom, found her a dry t-shirt and sweatpants that had once belonged to Emma's mother, and left her to change. When he checked on Emma, she was still sleeping peacefully, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, completely unaware that her father's terrifying boss was now in the next room. Daniel returned to the living room and stood at the window, watching the storm rage over the city. His reflection stared back at him, tired eyes, stubbled jaw, the face of a man who'd been running on empty for far too long. What the hell have you gotten yourself into? He didn't have an answer. But as he settled onto the couch, pulling a thin blanket over his shoulders, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, everything would change. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't terrify him. It felt like the beginning of something he couldn't name. Dichos. Daniel didn't sleep. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm gradually exhaust itself outside his windows. The thunder grew distant. The rain softened to a steady murmur. By 3 a.m., an eerie stillness had settled over the city. His mind wouldn't stop churning. Grant Mercer knows she's dying. He's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Daniel had always suspected there was something wrong with Grant. The man was too smooth, too polished, too quick with compliments that never quite reached his eyes. He'd risen through Vale Industries with suspicious speed, accumulating power and influence like a magnet collecting iron filings. But corporate sabotage was one thing. What Alexandra was describing, compromising her medical team, surveilling her movements, possibly arranging for violence, that was something else entirely. That was criminal, potentially murderous. And Daniel was now in the middle of it. Around 4 a.m., he heard movement from the bedroom, soft footsteps, the creak of a door. Daniel sat up to find Alexandra standing in the hallway, silhouetted by the faint light from the window. She'd changed into the clothes he'd given her, his old Northwestern t-shirt, faded sweatpants that were too long for her frame. Without her designer armor, she looked smaller, younger, almost fragile. "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly. "Me neither." She moved to the armchair across from him and curled up in it, drawing her knees to her chest like a child seeking comfort. In that moment, with her wet hair drying in tangled waves and her face scrubbed clean of makeup, she looked nothing like the fearsome CEO who had made grown men weep in board meetings. She looked like someone who was very, very tired of fighting. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "You can ask. I may not answer." "How long have you been doing this alone?" Alexandra was quiet for so long that Daniel thought she wasn't going to respond. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Always." The word hung between them, heavy with history. "My father built Vale Industries from nothing," she continued. "He was a cardiologist who got tired of watching patients die because they couldn't afford treatment. He developed our first affordable heart monitor in his garage, working 18-hour days while my mother raised me and my brother alone." Her eyes grew distant. "He used to say that every heart that stopped beating because of poverty was a failure of imagination, a failure of will. He believed we could do better, build better, be better." "What happened to him?" "He died when I was 24, heart attack." A bitter smile crossed her face. The man who dedicated his life to saving hearts couldn't save his own. He'd been ignoring symptoms for months because he was too busy, too stubborn, too convinced that he had more time. "I'm sorry." "He left me the company. Not my brother, me. My brother had no interest in business. He's a pediatrician now in Seattle. Good man. Better than me, probably." Alexandra stared at her hands, folded in her lap. "I inherited a company on the verge of bankruptcy, a board of directors who didn't believe a 24-year-old woman could run anything, and a heart condition that my father had kept secret from everyone, including me. He knew? He was my cardiologist. Of course he knew. He just never told me." Her voice cracked slightly. "I found out when I collapsed during my first board meeting. The ambulance came. The tests were run. And suddenly I was a sick young woman trying to save a dying company while my own heart was planning to kill me." Daniel felt something shift in his chest, something that had been closed for a long time cracking open. "So you did it all alone," he said. "Built the company back up. Became one of the most successful CEOs in the country. All while waiting to die." "Yes." Alexandra laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "Do you know what keeps me going, Daniel? What gets me out of bed every morning, knowing that any day could be my last? Tell me." "Spite." Her eyes flashed with something fierce and alive. Pure, unadulterated spite. Every doctor who told me I wouldn't live past 30, every board member who tried to push me out, every competitor who said Vale Industries was finished. I wanted to prove them all wrong. I wanted to build something that would outlast me, outlast all of them, and save more lives than any of them ever could. That's not spite, Daniel said quietly. That's hope. Alexandra looked at him sharply, as if he'd said something that surprised her. Hope? Spite doesn't build cardiac technology that saves lives. Spite doesn't keep you fighting for 18 years with a death sentence hanging over your head. That's hope. You just call it spite because hope feels too vulnerable. For a moment, Alexandra simply stared at him. Daniel couldn't read her expression, something between anger and wonder, like he'd accidentally found a door she'd kept locked for years. Who are you? She finally asked. Nobody special, just a guy who stays late to crunch numbers and worries about his daughter and tries to pay his rent on time. Daniel shrugged. I'm the most ordinary person you've ever met. No, Alexandra said softly. You're not. They sat in silence as the first gray light of dawn began seeping through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and dripping. Daniel's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He grabbed it, frowning at the screen. What is it? Alexandra asked. Text from work, emergency all-staff meeting at 10 a.m. He looked up at her. Grant's called it. You're not mentioned anywhere. Alexandra's face hardened. He's making his move. With me missing, he'll try to position himself as interim leadership, claim I've abandoned my responsibilities. Can he do that? The board's been looking for an excuse. If I don't show up, if I can't prove I'm still fit to lead. She stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. I need to get back. I need to be at that meeting. You need to rest, Daniel countered. You almost collapsed 12 hours ago. Your doctor said, my doctor is a traitor who's been feeding information to the man trying to steal my company. Alexandra's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I don't give a damn what he said. Then think about what makes strategic sense. Daniel rose to face her. You show up to that meeting looking like death warmed over, Grant wins. He'll have the board convinced you're incapable of leading before you even open your mouth. So what do you suggest? Hide here forever while he dismantles everything my father built? I suggest you take 12 hours to recover your strength and build a plan that doesn't involve walking into an ambush. Daniel held her gaze, refusing to back down. You're one of the smartest people in the world, Ms. Vale. Act like it. The silence between them stretched taut as a wire. Then, unexpectedly, Alexandra laughed. A real laugh this time, surprised and almost delighted. Did you just give me a direct order? I gave you advice. What you do with it is your choice. Nobody gives me orders, Daniel. Nobody tells me what to do. Maybe that's part of the problem. She stared at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Then she sat back down in the armchair, her shoulders relaxing slightly. 12 hours, she said. I'll give you 12 hours. Then I'm going back, ready or not. That's all I'm asking. The bedroom door at the end of the hall creaked open. Small footsteps padded down the hallway, and then Emma appeared, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Her dark hair stood up in wild tangles, and she clutched her stuffed elephant by one ear. Daddy, who's that lady? Daniel's heart clenched. He'd hoped to have this conversation later, after coffee, after figuring out what to tell his daughter about the stranger sleeping in their apartment. But Emma had her mother's timing, always appearing at the exact moment when things were most complicated. Hey, sweetheart. Daniel crossed to her and knelt down to her level. This is a friend from Daddy's work. She needed a place to stay because of the big storm last night. Emma peered around him at Alexandra with the unfiltered curiosity only children possess. She looked sad. Daniel felt Alexandra stiffen behind him. He glanced back, expecting anger, but what he saw instead made his chest ache. Alexandra was looking at Emma with an expression of profound vulnerability, like a window had opened into something she kept carefully hidden. I am a little sad, Alexandra said softly, but your daddy is helping me feel better. Emma considered this with the grave seriousness of a 6-year-old evaluating important information. Would you like to meet Eleanor? Eleanor? Emma held up her stuffed elephant. She's very good at making people not sad. She sleeps with me every night and keeps the bad dreams away. Alexandra's eyes glistened. She swallowed hard, composing herself. I would be honored to meet Eleanor. Emma crossed the room with the fearless confidence of childhood and placed the worn elephant carefully in Alexandra's lap. You can borrow her, but just for today, because I need her tonight. Thank you, Emma. Alexandra's voice was thick. That's very kind of you. Daniel watched the exchange with a lump in his throat. His daughter, his brilliant, compassionate, impossibly sweet daughter, had done something in 30 seconds that all of Alexandra's security teams and personal assistants and billions of dollars could never do. She'd made the most powerful woman in Chicago feel safe. Okay, baby girl, Daniel said, clearing his throat. Let's get you some breakfast. What do you want? Pancakes? Waffles? Pancakes! Emma bounced on her toes. With chocolate chips. Chocolate chips it is. As Daniel moved to the kitchen, he caught Alexandra's eye. She was still holding the stuffed elephant, her fingers gentle on its worn fur, and there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before, something that looked almost like peace. The next few hours passed in a strange domestic rhythm that felt both surreal and oddly natural. Daniel made pancakes while Emma chattered endlessly about her kindergarten class, her best friend Lucy, and the very important art project she was working on that involved lots and lots of glitter. Alexandra sat at the small kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and listening with an attention that seemed to surprise even her. And then Lucy said that unicorns aren't real, Emma continued between bites of pancake. But I told her that just because we haven't seen something doesn't mean it's not real. Maybe unicorns are just really good at hiding. That's excellent logic, Alexandra said gravely. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Emma beamed. See, Daddy? She gets it. Daniel smiled, flipping another pancake. I never said I didn't get it. I just said we shouldn't build our life plans around finding unicorns. Well, that's just boring. Alexandra laughed, a genuine, unexpected sound that made Daniel pause mid-flip. When he looked at her, the transformation was remarkable. The CEO mask had slipped entirely. This was someone else beneath it, someone warmer, someone who might have been a completely different person if life had dealt her different cards. After breakfast, Emma dragged Alexandra to her room to show off her art projects, her book collection, and her very impressive tower of building blocks that she'd been working on for like 100 years. Daniel cleaned up the kitchen, listening to their voices drift down the hall. Emma's high and excited, Alexandra's lower and measured but increasingly animated. When they emerged 20 minutes later, Emma was wearing a crown made of construction paper, and Alexandra was wearing one too. Daddy, did you know that Ms. Alexandra's favorite color is blue? Just like mine. I did not know that, Daniel said, trying very hard not to laugh at the sight of a billionaire CEO in a paper crown. And she likes the same books I do. She read me the beginning of Charlotte's Web, and she does really good pig voices. Daniel raised an eyebrow at Alexandra, who shrugged with exaggerated dignity. I contain multitudes. Clearly. The morning sun had burned away the last of the storm clouds, flooding the apartment with warm light. For a few hours, Daniel almost forgot why Alexandra was here. Almost forgot about Grant Mercer, corporate conspiracy, medical betrayal. Almost forgot that the woman in his kitchen was dying. But reality, as always, came crashing back. Around 9:30 a.m., Alexandra's phone buzzed with a series of rapid-fire notifications. She pulled it from her pocket, and Daniel watched her face transform back into something harder, colder, more familiar. What is it? He asked. Grant's moved faster than I expected. Her voice was clipped, professional. He's issued a statement claiming I've taken an unannounced leave of absence for personal health reasons. The board is convening an emergency session this afternoon to discuss interim leadership. Can they do that without you? Technically, no, but if I can't be reached, if I don't appear to contest it, she trailed off, her jaw tight. He's planned this perfectly. Isolate me, discredit me, take control while I'm vulnerable. By the time I resurface, he'll have consolidated enough power to make any challenge nearly impossible. Emma had wandered back to her room to play, leaving Daniel and Alexandra alone in the kitchen. The paper crown still sat askew on Alexandra's head, a jarring contrast to the predatory calculation in her eyes. So what's the move? Daniel asked. You can't hide here forever, but you also can't walk into that building without knowing who you can trust. I've been thinking about that. Alexandra pulled off the paper crown and set it carefully on the table, gently, like it mattered. I need to get to my personal server at home. There's documentation there that Grant doesn't know exists. Evidence of his communications, his bribes, his arrangement with my doctor. If I can access it, I can bring him down. Where's home? Lakefront penthouse, 43rd floor, approximately 2,000 square feet of extremely compromised space. She grimaced. If Grant has people watching it, I'll be walking into a trap. Daniel thought for a moment. What if you don't go in through the front door? Meaning I've seen enough movies to know that buildings like yours have service entrances, maintenance access, emergency stairs, ways in that nobody watches because nobody thinks to watch them. He met her eyes. What if we find another way in? Alexandra studied him with new interest. We? You think I'm letting you do this alone? Daniel, this isn't your fight. You have Emma to think about. If something happens to you, Grant Mercer takes over your company and destroys everything it stands for. My mother died because she couldn't afford a cardiologist. Your technology could have saved her. Daniel's voice roughened. Emma's grandmother could still be alive if Vale Industries had gotten there 10 years earlier. So yeah, Ms. Vale, it is my fight. Alexandra was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. You really believe in this company, in what we're trying to do. I believe in what it could be, what you're trying to make it. Most people think I'm a heartless corporate raider who got lucky with my daddy's company. Most people are idiots. A surprised laugh escaped her. Fair enough. They spent the next hour planning. Alexandra drew diagrams of her building from memory, entry points, security protocols, areas where coverage was weak. Daniel contributed what he knew about corporate security systems from his years of working in the industry. Together, they identified a potential route, a service elevator in the building's underground parking garage that connected directly to a maintenance corridor near the penthouse. It's still risky, Alexandra admitted. If anyone's watching the garage, then we need a distraction. Daniel pulled up a news app on his phone. What if Grant thinks he knows where you are? Somewhere far from here. Somewhere that would pull his attention away from the penthouse. Like where? Daniel scrolled through the morning headlines, searching for something, anything that might work. Then he found it. There's a medical conference in St. Louis this weekend. Dr. Harrison, your cardiologist at Northwestern, is presenting. What if word got out that you were seen boarding a flight there? Alexandra's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You want to plant false information. Make them think I'm running to my doctor for answers. It would buy us time. And if Grant's people are monitoring flight manifests, hospital check-ins, they'd focus their resources on St. Louis instead of Chicago. Alexandra nodded slowly. It could work, but we'd need someone trustworthy to plant the rumor, someone Grant hasn't compromised. Daniel thought about his contacts at the company. Most were too low-level to have the kind of access they needed. But there was one person. Lisa Chen, he said. She works in corporate communications. We've been friends for years. She's one of the few people at Vale who doesn't play political games, and she hates Grant Mercer. Why? He tried to get her fired last year when she refused to spike a story about safety issues in one of our overseas manufacturing plants. She went over his head to you. Alexandra's expression shifted. I remember that. I thought it was strange that a junior communications staffer would have the courage to bypass the CFO and come directly to me. She paused. I should have paid more attention to what that said about Grant. Can you reach out to her, quietly? If she can leak the St. Louis story to the right people. I can do better than that. Alexandra was already typing on her phone. I have a secure channel that only 3 people know about. Lisa is one of them. You set up a secret communication channel with a junior communication staffer? I set up secret communication channels with anyone who demonstrates loyalty over self-interest. It's a very short list. She looked up from her phone. You're on it now, by the way. Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The message was sent. Within minutes, a response came back, a single emoji that Alexandra seemed to find satisfactory. Lisa's in, she said. The rumor will start spreading within the hour. By noon, Grant's attention should be firmly focused on St. Louis. Then we move tonight? We move tonight. They fell silent, the weight of what they were planning settling over them. Daniel looked at Alexandra, really looked at her, and saw something that surprised him. Beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the careful armor she'd rebuilt over the course of the morning, there was something else. Determination. Fierce and burning and utterly alive. She's not giving up, he realized. She's been fighting alone for 18 years, and she's still not giving up. Miss Vale, he said quietly. Alexandra. What? Call me Alexandra. I think we're past the point of formal titles, don't you? Daniel smiled slightly. Alexandra, whatever happens tonight, I want you to know something. What? He held her gaze steadily. You asked me if you were beautiful last night when you showed up at my door. Alexandra's expression flickered. I was half out of my mind. I don't know why You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met. She stopped. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Not because of your money or your company or your power, Daniel continued, because you've spent 18 years fighting for something bigger than yourself while knowing every day could be your last. Because you care about hearts that will never know your name. Because you came to a stranger's door at midnight, scared and alone, and asked the kind of question that takes real courage to ask. He paused. So yes, you're beautiful, and anyone who can't see that isn't looking hard enough. Alexandra's eyes glistened. She blinked rapidly, composing herself with visible effort. Daniel Reed, she said finally, her voice rough. What am I supposed to do with you? Help me get you through tonight. That's a start. She laughed, a wet surprise sound that was half sob and half relief. Deal. They shook on it, her hand warm in his, and for the first time since she'd appeared at his door, Daniel saw something in her eyes that looked like hope, real hope, not spite. Hope. The afternoon passed in tense preparation. Emma was dropped off at the neighbor's apartment with an explanation about Daddy having to work late. Mrs. Patterson, a retired school teacher who'd watched Emma countless times before, asked no questions and promised to keep her overnight if needed. Be careful, Daniel, she said quietly at the door, her wise old eyes seeing more than he would have liked. Whatever you're into, I'm always careful, Mrs. P. That's what worries me. Back at the apartment, Alexandra had transformed. She'd borrowed more of his clothes, jeans, a dark hoodie, sneakers that were slightly too big, and pulled her hair back into a practical ponytail. Without makeup, without her designer wardrobe, she looked like any other woman in her early 40s. Anonymous. Unremarkable. It was perfect. The car I'm thinking of is parked 3 blocks away, Daniel explained as they went over the plan one more time. It's my neighbor's. He's out of town for a week, but he always leaves a spare key under the wheel, well, because he locks himself out constantly. We're stealing a car? Borrowing. We'll have it back before he knows it's gone. Alexandra raised an eyebrow. I'm learning all kinds of new things about you today, Daniel. Desperate times. By 8 p.m., they were ready. Daniel checked his phone one last time. Lisa's update confirmed that the St. Louis rumor was spreading exactly as planned. Grant's security team had been spotted mobilizing toward O'Hare, clearly preparing to intercept Alexandra at the airport. The deception was working. Ready? Daniel asked. Alexandra pulled up the hood of the borrowed sweatshirt, shadowing her face. In the dim light of the apartment, she looked almost like a different person. Someone harder. Someone ready for battle. Ready! They slipped out into the night. To be continued? The city had changed after the storm. Wet pavement reflected streetlights in shimmering ribbons of orange and white. The air smelled clean, washed free of exhaust and summer heat, carrying the fresh bite of autumn just around the corner. Daniel led Alexandra through back alleys and side streets, avoiding the main roads where cameras might catch them. She moved quietly beside him, her borrowed sneakers making almost no sound on the wet concrete. For someone who spent her life in boardrooms and penthouses, she adapted quickly to the shadows. You've done this before, Daniel observed quietly, sneaking around, staying hidden. My father wasn't always a successful businessman, Alexandra replied. When I was young, before Vale Industries took off, We lived in a neighborhood where you learned to watch your back, where you knew which streets to avoid after dark. She glanced at him. Money changes your circumstances. It doesn't erase what you learned growing up. They reached Mr. Henderson's car, a nondescript gray Honda that blended into the urban landscape like camouflage. Daniel found the key exactly where expected and slid into the driver's seat. Alexandra took the passenger side, adjusting the seat to accommodate her shorter frame. "Lakefront Drive," she said, "then south on Michigan. I'll direct you from there." The drive was tense and silent. Daniel kept checking the mirrors for any sign of pursuit, but the streets behind them stayed empty. Whatever resources Grant had mobilized, they were focused elsewhere. Thank God for misdirection. Alexandra's penthouse building rose against the night sky like a monument to wealth and power. Glass and steel, 45 stories of luxury living that probably cost more per square foot than Daniel's entire apartment building was worth. The main entrance blazed with light, doormen visible through the grand lobby windows. "There," Alexandra said, pointing to a parking garage entrance half a block down. "Service access. It requires a key card, but—" "You have one?" She produced a card from her pocket. "Emergency backup. I keep it in a separate location precisely for situations like this." Daniel pulled the Honda into the garage entrance. The card beeped, the gate rose, and they descended into the concrete depths beneath the building. The underground parking garage was a maze of luxury vehicles and support columns. Daniel navigated carefully, following Alexandra's whispered directions until they reached a far corner, dimly lit, away from the main traffic areas. "Service elevator is through that door," Alexandra said, indicating a plain metal door marked "Maintenance Only." "It connects to a corridor that runs behind the residential floors. From there, we can access my penthouse through a hidden entrance in the back of my closet." "Oh, you have a secret entrance in your closet?" "I'm a 42-year-old woman with a terminal heart condition running a billion-dollar company in a world full of people who want me dead. Yes, Daniel, I have a secret entrance in my closet." "Fair point." They moved quickly and quietly. The maintenance corridor was exactly as Alexandra had described: narrow, utilitarian, lined with electrical panels and building infrastructure. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow. "How often do you use this route?" Daniel whispered. "I've done drills, planned for emergencies, but this is the first time I've actually needed it." Alexandra's voice was tight. "I always thought I was being paranoid." "Paranoid people live longer." They climbed stairs, navigated through unmarked doors, and finally emerged into a narrow passage that Alexandra identified as running behind the penthouse's master bedroom. She pressed her palm to a hidden panel, and a section of wall clicked open. "Stay here," she whispered. "Let me make sure it's clear." Before Daniel could object, she'd slipped through the hidden door and disappeared. The seconds stretched into eternity. Daniel counted his heartbeats, too fast, too loud, and strained his ears for any sound from beyond the wall. Footsteps, voices, anything that might indicate they'd walked into a trap. Nothing. Then Alexandra reappeared, her face pale in the dim light. "It's clear, but someone's been here. My study, they've gone through everything." They emerged into the penthouse. Daniel had seen photos of luxury apartments in magazines, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of Alexandra's home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Hardwood floors that gleamed even in the darkness. Art on the walls that probably cost more than his annual salary. But Alexandra wasn't paying attention to any of it. She moved with focused intensity toward a room at the end of the hall. Her study, apparently. Daniel followed. The study had been ransacked. Books pulled from shelves. Drawers emptied onto the floor. A beautiful antique desk covered with scattered papers. Whoever had searched this room had been thorough and utterly without regard for what they destroyed. "My files," Alexandra said, kneeling beside an open filing cabinet. "They took my physical copies, but they didn't find—" She reached behind the cabinet, fingers searching for something. "Yes, still here." She pulled out a small device, a portable hard drive, no bigger than a credit card. "What is that?" Daniel asked. "Insurance." Alexandra clutched the drive like a lifeline. "Everything I've gathered on Grant over the past year, encrypted communications, financial records, the arrangement with my doctor, all of it." "Why didn't they find it?" "Because I learned a long time ago that the best hiding places are the obvious ones people overlook. She stood, slipping the drive into her pocket. Now we need to... A sound from the other room. Movement. Footsteps. They weren't alone. Daniel grabbed Alexandra's arm, pulling her behind the desk just as the study door swung open. From his position crouched on the floor, he could only see a pair of expensive leather shoes entering the room. Then a voice, smooth, confident, utterly familiar. "I knew you'd come back, Alexandra. You're too stubborn to stay hidden for long." Grant Mercer. Daniel felt Alexandra tense beside him. Her hand found his, gripping tight. "Come out," Grant called. "I know you're here. My people tracked your car the moment it entered the garage." He laughed softly. "The St. Louis Gambit was clever, I'll admit. Bought you a few hours. But you can't outsmart me, Alexandra. You never could." Silence. "I'm not here to hurt you," Grant continued. "Quite the opposite, actually. I'm here to offer you a way out. A dignified exit. You step down quietly, spend your remaining months in comfort, and I ensure your legacy remains intact. The alternative," his voice hardened. "The alternative is much less pleasant." Daniel's mind raced. They were trapped. Grant was between them and the exit. Even if they could reach the hidden passage, Grant's people were surely monitoring the building now. But then Alexandra did something that surprised him. She stood up. "Grant!" Her voice was ice, cold and sharp and absolutely fearless. "You know what I find most pathetic about you?" Grant's expression flickered, surprised that she'd revealed herself so readily. "Enlighten me." "You've spent years planning this, years positioning yourself, cultivating allies, undermining my authority. You've bribed my doctor, compromised my security, probably spent millions on corporate espionage." Alexandra stepped out from behind the desk, positioning herself between Grant and Daniel's hiding spot. "And with all that planning, all that scheming, you still needed me to be dying before you had the courage to make your move." Grant's jaw tightened. "Be careful, Alexandra." "Why? Because I'm frightening you?" She laughed, a cold, dangerous sound. "You've never had the guts to face me directly. You work in shadows, whispers, manipulation, because you know that in a fair fight, you'd lose. There are no fair fights in business. No, there aren't, which is why I've spent the last year building a file on every dirty deal you've ever made." Alexandra's voice cut like a blade. "Did you think I didn't notice, Grant? The off-book payments, the communications with our competitors, the bribes to board members? I have it all. Every transaction, every email, every recorded phone call." For the first time, something like fear flickered in Grant's eyes. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Alexandra pulled the small drive from her pocket. "This contains enough evidence to put you in prison for the next 20 years. Securities fraud, corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit assault. Yes, Grant, I know about my driver. I know about the car that tried to run me down. I know about everything." Grant's face went white. "Give me that drive." "No." "Alexandra, here's what's going to happen." Her voice was steel. "You're going to walk out of this building. You're going to resign from Vale Industries effective immediately. You're going to disappear somewhere far away and spend the rest of your life praying that I never decide to send this evidence to the FBI. You can't. I can, and I will, unless you give me a very good reason not to." Alexandra stepped closer, her eyes locked on Grant's. "You wanted to know if I'm beautiful, Grant? If I'm still worth something? Here's your answer. I am the most dangerous enemy you will ever make. And right now, I'm giving you one chance to walk away. Take it." The silence in the room was absolute. Daniel watched from behind the desk, barely breathing, as Grant Mercer, the man who had orchestrated an entire conspiracy to steal an empire, crumbled before Alexandra's fury. "This isn't over," Grant finally said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Yes, it is." Alexandra's response was absolute. "The only question is whether it ends with you in prison or with you on a beach somewhere far away, counting your stolen millions and thanking God I let you go." Grant stared at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The sound of his footsteps faded. A door slammed somewhere in the penthouse. Then silence. Alexandra stood frozen for several seconds, her shoulders rigid, her breathing rapid. Then all at once, her knees buckled. Daniel was there before she hit the floor, catching her, lowering her gently. Her face was ashen, her hands trembling violently. Hey, hey, look at me. Daniel cupped her face in his hands. You did it. He's gone. You won. I can't. Alexandra gasped for breath. My heart. I pushed too hard. I'm calling an ambulance. No. She grabbed his arm. If I go to a hospital, Grant's people will find me. His network. It's not just him. Then what do we do? Alexandra's eyes found his. Even in her distress, even with her body failing her, there was fierce intelligence burning there. My doctor at Northwestern, Dr. Harrison, he's the only one I trust. We have to get to him. The same Dr. Harrison who's supposed to be in St. Louis right now? A weak laugh escaped her. The conference doesn't start until tomorrow. He's still in Chicago. Call him. Tell him it's finally time. Daniel found her phone, scrolled through contacts until he found the name. His hand shook as he dialed. Dr. Harrison, this is Daniel Reed. I'm with Alexandra Vale. She's in cardiac distress. He listened to the urgent questions on the other end. Her penthouse. We can meet you at Northwestern in 20 minutes if she can make it that long. The doctor's response was immediate and emphatic. Understood. Daniel ended the call. He's preparing the surgical team. He says if we're going to do the experimental procedure, it has to be now. Alexandra nodded weakly. Then let's go. Daniel helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. She leaned against him heavily, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Daniel, she whispered, save your strength. No, listen. Her hand found his chest, pressing against his heart. If I don't make it, you're going to make it. If I don't, she repeated firmly, the company goes to you. The board won't know what to do without a clear leader. Grant will try again, but you... Her eyes searched his face. You understand. You believe in what we're trying to build. Promise me you'll fight for it. Alexandra, promise me. Daniel swallowed hard. I promise. She smiled, faint and fragile and beautiful in a way that broke his heart. Then let's go save my life. Together, they moved toward the door, toward the future, toward whatever came next. The night was far from over, but Daniel Reed had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The elevator doors opened onto a nightmare of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. Daniel half-carried Alexandra through the emergency entrance of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, her body growing heavier against his with every step. Her breathing had become shallow and irregular during the drive, her skin taking on a grayish pallor that terrified him more than anything Grant Mercer could ever do. I need help, Daniel shouted into the sterile chaos. Someone help me! A team materialized around them, nurses in scrubs, orderlies with a gurney, and then a man Daniel recognized from the framed photographs in Alexandra's study. Dr. Harrison was younger than Daniel had expected, maybe early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm intensity that came from years of holding lives in his hands. Get her on the gurney, Dr. Harrison ordered. BP? Dropping, a nurse responded. 90/60 and falling. Prep or 3. Call the surgical team. Everyone on the list. We're doing this now. Daniel found himself pushed aside as the medical team surrounded Alexandra. He watched helplessly as they connected monitors, started IV lines, and began wheeling her toward the operating rooms. The beeping of machines created a symphony of urgency that made his chest tight. Wait! Alexandra's voice was barely audible, but it stopped everyone. Her hand reached out, searching. Daniel? He pushed through the medical staff and took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold, her grip surprisingly strong. Stay, she whispered. Please. I need to know someone's out there who... Her voice cracked. Who actually cares if I wake up? Daniel squeezed her hand, leaning close so only she could hear. I'll be right here when you open your eyes. I promise. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Then Dr. Harrison gently but firmly separated their hands, and the gurney disappeared through the double doors marked Surgical Suite, authorized personnel only. The doors swung shut with a soft whoosh, and Daniel was alone. He stood in the empty corridor, the adrenaline that had carried him through the past hours finally beginning to ebb. His legs felt weak. His hands were shaking. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with an indifferent hum that seemed to mock the gravity of what was happening behind those doors. A 40% chance of death. Those were the odds Alexandra had quoted. Less than a coin flip. Less than drawing a winning card from a deck. Somewhere behind those sterile walls, a team of surgeons was attempting something that had never been done on a human patient, and the woman who had walked into his life less than 24 hours ago might never walk out of this hospital. Daniel found a plastic chair against the wall and collapsed into it. He should call someone. Emma, to make sure she was okay. Mrs. Patterson, to explain he wouldn't be home tonight. His supervisor at Vale Industries, but no, that would raise too many questions. Questions he couldn't answer without exposing everything. Instead, he sat in the empty corridor and watched the clock on the wall tick away the minutes. The first hour was the longest of his life. Every time a door opened, every time footsteps echoed down the hallway, Daniel's heart lurched with desperate hope. But it was never news, never Dr. Harrison with an update. Just the ordinary rhythms of a hospital at night. Nurses changing shifts, orderlies pushing carts of supplies, the occasional visitor looking lost and afraid. Daniel understood that feeling now, lost and afraid. He'd felt it when Emma's mother left, when he'd realized he was going to raise a child alone with no support and no safety net. He'd felt it when his mother died, when he'd stood in a hospital much like this one and listened to a doctor explain that there was nothing more they could do. But this was different. This was a woman he'd known for less than a day. A woman who had been nothing but a name and a reputation until she appeared at his door, soaked and shaking and asking impossible questions. By all logic, he shouldn't care this much. He shouldn't feel this weight pressing on his chest, this desperate need for her to survive. But he did. Because in those 24 hours, Alexandra Vale had shown him something he'd forgotten existed. Courage. Real courage. Not the bravado of corporate meetings or the false confidence of motivational posters. The kind of courage that came from looking death in the face and choosing to fight anyway. She'd asked him if she was beautiful, and he'd told her the truth. But he hadn't told her the whole truth. He hadn't told her that watching her stand up to Grant Mercer, watching her refuse to break even as her body failed her, had been one of the most beautiful things he'd ever witnessed. The clock ticked past midnight. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson. Emma's asleep. Everything okay? He typed back, work emergency. Might be here all night. Thank you for understanding. The reply came quickly. Take care of yourself, Daniel. That little girl needs her father. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. Around 1 a.m., a nurse appeared with a cup of coffee. You're Ms. Vale's family? She asked. Daniel hesitated. I'm a friend. She doesn't have family nearby. The nurse's expression softened. She's still in surgery. Dr. Harrison wanted you to know it's going well so far. They've begun the stem cell integration. It's delicate work, but there haven't been any complications. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. Really? Thank you. The nurse nodded and disappeared back through the doors. Daniel drank the coffee without tasting it. The second hour was easier than the first, but only marginally. His mind wandered to places he didn't want it to go. Worst-case scenarios, the look on Emma's face if he never came home, the empty desk he'd leave behind at Vale Industries. He forced himself to focus on practicalities instead. If Alexandra survived, everything would change. She had evidence that could destroy Grant Mercer. She had the will to fight. But she would also need time to recover. 6 months, she'd said. 6 months where the company would be vulnerable, unless someone stepped up, unless someone she trusted was there to hold things together. The company goes to you. She'd said that in her penthouse, when she thought she might not make it. Daniel had dismissed it as delirium, the desperate words of a dying woman. But Alexandra Vale didn't say things she didn't mean. Even when her heart was failing, her mind had been crystal clear. She'd chosen him. The question was whether he could live up to that choice. At 2:47 a.m., the double doors opened and Dr. Harrison emerged. Daniel was on his feet before his mind registered the movement. The doctor's face was drawn with exhaustion, his surgical cap still perched on his head, But there was something in his eyes that made Daniel's heart stop. Hope. Mr. Reed? Dr. Harrison approached with measured steps. She made it through the surgery. The relief that flooded Daniel's body was so intense he had to grip the wall for support. She's alive? She's alive. The stem cell integration was successful, more successful than we dared hope, actually. Her heart responded remarkably well to the new tissue scaffolding. Barring complications, she should make a full recovery. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. He blinked them back, but his voice cracked anyway. Can I see her? She's in the ICU. She'll be unconscious for several hours, possibly longer. But yes, you can see her. Dr. Harrison paused, studying Daniel with clinical interest. I've known Alexandra for 15 years, Mr. Reed. She's never had anyone waiting for her after a procedure. Never once. The fact that you're here... He stopped, seeming to weigh his words. It matters. More than you know. Daniel followed the doctor through a maze of corridors to the intensive care unit. The ICU was quieter than the emergency area, the lighting dimmer, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of critical care. Machines hummed and beeped in soft rhythms, their displays flickering with the vital signs of patients clinging to life. Alexandra's room was at the end of the hall. Daniel paused at the doorway, his breath catching in his throat. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines and the technological apparatus of modern medicine. Her face was peaceful in sleep, the fierce intelligence temporarily subdued. A ventilator tube ran from her mouth, and electrodes dotted her chest beneath the pale hospital gown. But she was alive. Daniel pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and took her hand, careful to avoid the IV line taped to her wrist. You did it, he said softly. You made it through. No response, of course. Just the steady beep of the heart monitor, the soft hiss of the ventilator, the quiet proof that Alexandra Vale was still fighting. Daniel leaned back in his chair, still holding her hand. When you wake up, he continued, we're going to have a very long conversation about what happens next. About Grant. About the company. About... He paused, searching for words. About whatever this is. You and me. Because I don't know what this is. But I know it's something. Something I didn't expect. Something I'm not sure I was ready for. He fell silent, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. You asked me if you were beautiful. I gave you an answer, but I don't think you believed me. So when you wake up, I'm going to tell you again and again, until you believe it. Daniel's voice roughened. Because you are, Alexandra. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met, and I'm not letting you go now that I've found you. The machines continued their steady rhythms. Daniel stayed at her side. And outside the hospital windows, the first light of dawn began to touch the Chicago skyline. The night was finally over, but their story was just beginning. Alexandra Vale opened her eyes 3 days later. The first thing she saw was ceiling tiles, white, sterile, unfamiliar. The second thing she noticed was the tube in her throat, the weight of it uncomfortable and strange. And the third thing, the thing that made her eyes fill with unexpected tears, was Daniel Reed, asleep in a chair beside her bed, his hand still loosely holding hers. She tried to speak, but the ventilator prevented it. The effort triggered an alarm on one of the monitors, and within seconds, a nurse appeared. Ms. Vale, you're awake. That's wonderful. Try not to move too much. We're going to remove the breathing tube now. Just relax and let us work. The process was uncomfortable, but mercifully brief. As the tube slid free, Alexandra took her first unassisted breath in 3 days, the air rasping painfully in her throat. Daniel, she managed, her voice barely a croak. He jolted awake, disoriented for a moment. Then his eyes found hers and his face transformed with relief. You're awake. He moved to the edge of his chair, still holding her hand. How do you feel? Like someone opened my chest and rearranged my organs. A weak smile crossed her face. Wait, someone did open my chest and rearrange my organs. Dr. Harrison says the surgery was a success. Better than expected. Your heart is responding incredibly well to the treatment. Alexandra processed this information, the reality of it slowly sinking in. She'd prepared herself for death for so long that the prospect of living, truly living, without the sword of Damocles hanging over every moment, felt almost surreal. "What day is it?" she asked. "Tuesday. You've been out for 3 days." "The company. Grant. What's—" "Shh." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Everything's under control. Just focus on recovering right now." "Daniel, I need to know." Lisa Chen released the evidence to the FBI yesterday morning. His voice was calm, steady, as though he were reporting ordinary business news. Grant Mercer was arrested at O'Hare, trying to board a flight to Geneva. The board has called an emergency session for Thursday to appoint interim leadership, and about 24 journalists are camped outside the hospital trying to get a statement from you. Alexandra stared at him. "You did all that while I was unconscious." "I made some calls, coordinated with people you trust. Lisa's been incredible. She basically became our command center." Daniel shrugged, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and battles fought in boardrooms and conference calls. "You built a company with loyal people, Alexandra. I just helped them do what they wanted to do anyway. You saved my company. I kept things together until you could wake up and save it yourself." Alexandra's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't name. She'd spent 18 years believing she had to do everything alone, that asking for help was weakness, that depending on anyone would only lead to disappointment. And here was this man, this ordinary, extraordinary man who worked in a cubicle near the window, who had stepped up when she needed him most and asked for nothing in return. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you stay?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "When I was 23, he said finally, my mother died of a heart attack. She'd been having symptoms for months, but she couldn't afford the tests, the specialists, the treatment. She just kept going to work, kept pushing through the pain, kept pretending everything was fine. By the time she finally collapsed, it was too late." Alexandra watched his face, seeing the old grief that still lived there beneath the surface. "I chose Vale Industries because of what your father built, because he believed everyone deserved access to cardiac care, regardless of what they could pay. And then I stayed because even after 7 years of corporate politics and budget cuts and endless spreadsheets, I still believed in that mission." He met her eyes. "I stayed because you were worth staying for, not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, as a person who fights for something bigger than herself." "Daniel, you asked me if you were beautiful." His voice was soft but unwavering. "I've had 3 days to think about that question while watching you fight for your life. And I've decided that beautiful isn't a big enough word. You're remarkable. You're fierce. You're the kind of person who changes the world just by existing in it. And He stopped, seeming to gather courage. "I would very much like to be part of your world, if you'll let me." For a long moment, Alexandra simply looked at him. This man who had been a name on a spreadsheet 48 hours ago. This man who had opened his door to a stranger in the rain and never once asked what was in it for him. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to let someone in. I've been alone for so long." "Then we'll figure it out together." Daniel's smile was gentle. "I hear I'm pretty good at analysis and problem solving." Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the weight of all that had happened and all that was yet to come, Alexandra laughed. A real laugh that made her chest ache and her heart monitor spike in alarm. "I think," she said slowly, "that letting you stay might be the best decision I've ever made." "Better than building a billion-dollar company?" "Much better." Her fingers tightened around his. "Will you help me?" "Not just with the company, with everything. The recovery, the rebuilding, She hesitated. "The learning how to live instead of just survive." "Alexandra Vale," Daniel said. "I thought you'd never ask." The recovery was brutal. Daniel had expected it to be difficult. Dr. Harrison had warned them repeatedly that the experimental procedure would require months of intensive rehabilitation. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of watching Alexandra fight her way back to health, one agonizing step at a time. The first week in the ICU was focused on survival. Alexandra's body, weakened by years of cardiac deterioration and the trauma of surgery, struggled to regulate itself. Fevers spiked and broke. Infections threatened and were beaten back. Blood pressure readings sent nurses scrambling for medications at all hours of the night. Through it all, Daniel stayed. He worked from the hospital, his laptop balanced on his knees in the chair beside Alexandra's bed. He coordinated with Lisa Chen by phone, managing the crisis at Vail Industries while the board scrambled to stabilize the company's leadership. He answered questions from journalists, lawyers, and federal investigators, all while keeping Alexandra's actual condition as private as possible. And when the work was done, when the calls were finished and the emails answered, he simply sat with her. Read to her when she was too tired to focus on screens. Talk to her about Emma, about his childhood, about the dreams he'd abandoned and the ones he still held close. Listened when she wanted to talk and provided comfortable silence when she didn't. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to extended Emma sitting duties, understanding that whatever Daniel was dealing with was more than a simple work emergency. On the fourth day, he finally brought Emma to the hospital for a brief visit. "Daddy, why is the lady from the storm in a hospital bed?" Emma asked, her small face scrunched with concern. "She had a problem with her heart, sweetheart. The doctors fixed it, but now she needs to rest and get better." Emma considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old philosopher. Then she marched to Alexandra's bedside, reached into her pocket, and produced a somewhat crumpled piece of paper. "I made you a picture," Emma announced. "It's a rainbow. Rainbows come after storms, and Daddy said you were in a big storm, so I thought you might need one." Alexandra looked at the child's drawing, bright crayon strokes forming an exuberant arc of colors over what appeared to be a house with 2 figures standing in front of it. "Is that your house?" Alexandra asked, her voice still rough from the ventilator. "That's our apartment. And that's me and Daddy. And that's you." Emma pointed to a third figure that Alexandra hadn't noticed, slightly taller than the child figure, with what might have been long hair. "I'm in the picture?" "Well, yeah. You live with us now, don't you?" Daniel started to correct her, to explain that Alexandra had only stayed one night, and it wasn't really living with them, but something in Alexandra's expression stopped him. A vulnerability he was learning to recognize. A hunger for something she'd never allowed herself to want. "Maybe someday, Emma," Alexandra said softly, "if your daddy says it's okay." Emma turned to Daniel with expectant eyes. "Daddy? Can she?" Daniel looked at Alexandra, this woman who had turned his world upside down in less than a week, who had shown him that power and vulnerability weren't opposites, who had trusted him with her life and her legacy. "We'll see, baby girl," he said. "We'll see." The second week brought progress. Alexandra was moved from the ICU to a private recovery suite, which Dr. Harrison had arranged with extra security to keep the media and any remaining threats at bay. The feeding tube came out. The worst of the pain began to fade, and slowly, carefully, the work of rebuilding began. The board of Vail Industries, after 3 days of contentious meetings, voted to appoint Daniel Reed as interim CEO. When he told Alexandra, she simply smiled. "I know. You know. How could you know? I only found out an hour ago. Because I made some calls of my own, asked some trusted board members to support the decision." She reached for his hand from her hospital bed. "You earned it, Daniel. Not because of me, because of how you handled everything while I was unconscious. Lisa told me about the press conferences, the FBI coordination, the way you kept the company from imploding. You did that. Not as someone acting on my behalf, as a leader in your own right. I'm a financial analyst. I sit in a cubicle near the window. You were a financial analyst. Now you're the man who's going to run my company until I'm ready to take it back." Her eyes sparkled with something that might have been pride. "Think you can handle it?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "I have no idea, but I'm willing to try. That's all any of us can do." The weeks that followed blurred together into a rhythm of recovery and rebuilding. Alexandra's body grew stronger day by day, first sitting up unassisted, then standing with support, then taking her first trembling steps down the hospital corridor. Each milestone was celebrated with quiet joy and followed immediately by the next challenge. Meanwhile, Daniel threw himself into the work of stabilizing Vail Industries. The company had been shaken by Grant Mercer's arrest, by the revelations of his corruption, by the suddenly uncertain future of their leadership. Stock prices had dropped 20% in the first week, and suppliers and partners were calling for reassurance that the company could still deliver on its commitments. Daniel gave them that reassurance, not with grand speeches or bold promises, but with steady, methodical competence. He reviewed every major contract, met with every department head, and made decisions that prioritized the company's mission over short-term profits. The cardiac technology program that Grant had planned to sell off? Daniel expanded it, accelerating the timeline for affordable heart monitors and accessible treatment protocols. Within a month, the stock price had stabilized. Within 2 months, it had begun to climb again. And through it all, Daniel made time for the things that mattered. He visited Alexandra every day, updating her on company developments and listening to her strategic insights. He picked up Emma from school 3 afternoons a week, maintaining some semblance of normal fatherhood despite the chaos. He slept 5 hours a night when he was lucky, 4 when he wasn't, and somehow kept going on determination and coffee and the knowledge that people were counting on him. It was on a Thursday evening in late October, 2 months after Alexandra's surgery, that everything changed again. Daniel was in his office at Vail Industries, reviewing quarterly projections, when his phone rang. The number was blocked, but something made him answer anyway. "Mr. Reed." The voice was unfamiliar, cold, and precisely controlled. "We need to talk about Alexandra Vail." Daniel's blood went cold. "Who is this?" "Someone who has information you need. Information about threats that didn't end with Grant Mercer's arrest." "I'm hanging up now." Grant wasn't working alone. The voice cut through Daniel's dismissal. He had partners, powerful partners who don't appreciate that their investment in his scheme didn't pay off. They're regrouping, they're planning, and they're very interested in making sure Alexandra Vail never returns to power. Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. "How do I know you're not one of them?" "Because I'm the one who's been feeding information to Lisa Chen for the past 6 weeks. Anonymous tips about Grant's network, names of compromised board members, details about offshore accounts." A pause. "Check your secure server. There's a file waiting for you. Everything I know about what's coming. Consider it a gesture of good faith." "Why help us?" "Because Grant Mercer destroyed something I cared about too. And because Alexandra Vail is the only person with enough power and enough integrity to take down the people who created him." The voice hardened. "Read the file, Mr. Reed. Then decide if you're ready to fight." The line went dead. Daniel sat motionless for a long moment, his heart pounding. Then he turned to his computer and accessed the secure server. The file was there. Encrypted, massive, clearly the work of someone with deep access to corporate intelligence networks. And as Daniel began to read, his blood ran colder with every page. Grant Mercer hadn't been a lone wolf. He'd been a weapon, deployed by a consortium of competitors who wanted Vail Industries' cardiac technology for themselves. When Grant's takeover failed, they didn't give up. They simply started planning a new approach, an approach that involved hostile takeover attempts, regulatory attacks, and, if all else failed, more direct methods of removing Alexandra from the picture. The file contained names, dates, financial transactions, intercepted communications. It was a roadmap of corporate conspiracy at the highest levels, implicating some of the most powerful figures in American business. And at the center of it all was a simple, terrifying conclusion. Alexandra Vail was still in danger, and the threat was bigger than anything they'd imagined. Daniel grabbed his coat and headed for the hospital. Alexandra was alone in her room when he arrived, sitting up in bed and reading reports on a tablet. The color had returned to her cheeks over the past weeks, and the frailty that had characterized her early recovery had given way to something harder, more focused. She was rebuilding herself the same way she'd rebuilt her company, with relentless determination. "Daniel." She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" He closed the door behind him and crossed to her bedside. "We need to talk. Something's happened." He told her everything, the phone call, the mysterious informant, the file waiting on the secure server. He watched her face transform as she absorbed the information, the warmth draining away to reveal the steel beneath. "Show me the file," she said. Daniel handed over his tablet. Alexandra read in silence, her eyes moving rapidly across the screen, processing information with the speed that had made her legendary in business circles. When she finished, she looked up at him with an expression he knew well, the expression of a woman going to war. "They think I'm weak," she said quietly. They think the surgery, the recovery, Grant's arrest, they think it's broken me, made me vulnerable. Are they wrong? They're the most wrong they've ever been. Alexandra set aside the tablet and met his eyes with fierce intensity. I've spent 2 months lying in this bed, Daniel, thinking, planning, preparing. They gave me time to see the whole board, every piece in play, and now I know exactly how to beat them. How? By doing something they never expected. A dangerous smile crossed her face. By going public. All of it. The conspiracy, the corruption, the threats. Not through lawyers or regulators, through the press. Let the whole world see what they're really doing. That's risky. They could what? Try to destroy me? They're already trying. Threaten my company? They've been threatening it for years. Alexandra reached for his hand. The only power these people have is the power of secrecy. They work in shadows, manipulating from behind the scenes. Drag them into the light, and they crumble. Daniel thought about this, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. It was a bold strategy, exactly the kind of high-stakes gamble that had built Vale Industries into what it was today, and exactly the kind of gamble that could destroy everything if it went wrong. There's something else, he said slowly. Something we need to consider. What? You. He squeezed her hand. Your health. Your recovery. You're not ready for the kind of fight this would become. The stress, the public scrutiny, the attacks. Daniel, let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm. I've watched you nearly die once. I've sat in this hospital for 2 months praying you'd get stronger. And I'm not willing to risk losing you again just because some corporate villains need to be taught a lesson. Alexandra was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. You really do care. About me. Not just the company, not the mission, me. I thought I made that clear. You did. She stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily to her. I'm not used to someone putting me first, ahead of everything else. It's disorienting. Get used to it. Daniel leaned closer. Because I'm not going anywhere. Whatever we decide to do about this conspiracy, we do it together. And we do it in a way that doesn't destroy what we're trying to build. Alexandra studied his face for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Together, she agreed. We do this together. So what's the plan? First, we finish my recovery. I need to be strong enough to stand on my own when the fight begins, not physically dependent on hospitals and doctors. Her jaw set with determination. Dr. Harrison says I can be discharged in 2 weeks if I continue improving at this rate. I want to be home, really home, not hiding in safe houses or cowering from shadows. Your penthouse? Too compromised. Grant's people had access to everything. Even after we've swept for surveillance, I'll never feel secure there again. She paused, considering. I need somewhere new, somewhere that's really mine. I might have an idea about that. Oh? Daniel hesitated, knowing he was about to cross a line he couldn't uncross. Emma asked when you were coming to live with us, the night she brought you the rainbow picture. Alexandra's eyes widened. Daniel, I know it's fast, I know it's unconventional. I know that 24 hours ago, we'd never even had a conversation. He took a breath. But I also know that the past 2 months have felt more real than the past 3 years. And I know that when I imagine the future, you're in it. You and Emma and me, figuring this out together. You're asking me to move in with you. I'm asking you to consider it when you're ready. If you're ready. He smiled crookedly. My apartment isn't exactly penthouse quality, but the company's excellent. Alexandra stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Then something extraordinary happened. She laughed. Not the bitter, hollow laugh he'd heard that first night, or the weak, exhausted laugh from her hospital bed. This was pure, joyful, surprised laughter, the sound of someone discovering that happiness might actually be possible. You're insane, she said finally. You know that, right? Completely insane. Is that a yes? It's a let me think about it. But she was smiling as she said it, and her hand tightened around his. It's also a thank you for being brave enough to ask. I can work with that. They sat together in comfortable silence as the evening deepened outside the hospital windows. The city lights of Chicago glittered in the darkness, a million stories playing out across the urban landscape. And somewhere in that vast expanse, enemies were plotting and conspiracies were brewing and threats were gathering. But in this quiet room, for this brief moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the woman holding his hand. What mattered was the future they were daring to imagine. What mattered was the choice to fight, not just for survival, not just for victory, but for something worth living for. Alexandra Vale had asked if she was beautiful. Daniel Reed had answered with the truth. Now they would discover whether that truth was strong enough to survive what was coming. The days that followed brought both progress and preparation. Alexandra threw herself into recovery with the same intensity she'd brought to building her company, pushing through pain and exhaustion to meet every milestone Dr. Harrison set. She walked the hospital corridors until her legs gave out, then rested briefly before walking them again. She reviewed company documents for hours, rebuilding her strategic vision piece by piece. She made calls to trusted allies, slowly reconstructing the network that Grant Mercer had tried to destroy. And through it all, Daniel was there. He adjusted his schedule at Vale Industries to be present for Alexandra's physical therapy sessions, watching with quiet pride as she regained strength and mobility. He brought Emma to visit on weekends, letting the unlikely friendship between the billionaire CEO and the 6-year-old flourish in ways that surprised everyone. He held Alexandra's hand through the dark nights when pain and fear kept sleep at bay, never asking for explanations, simply offering presence. Their relationship defied easy categorization. They weren't exactly dating. There was no time for dinner and movies when one of them was recovering from experimental surgery and the other was running a Fortune 500 company. But they weren't just friends either. The connection between them had grown too deep, too intimate, too essential for such a simple label. "What are we?" Alexandra asked one evening as Daniel helped her practice walking without support. "I keep trying to define it, and I can't." "Maybe we don't need to define it." Daniel steadied her as she wobbled slightly. "Maybe we just need to live it." That's very philosophical for a financial analyst. I've had good teachers recently. Alexandra made it 3 more steps before her legs began to tremble. Daniel caught her, easing her into a nearby chair, and she leaned against him gratefully. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said quietly. "My offer?" "To move in with you. With you and Emma." Daniel's heart stuttered. And I think it's still insane and impractical and probably a terrible idea." She looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, only certainty. "And I think I want to try it anyway." "Really?" "I've spent my entire adult life being practical, strategic, careful. I've made every decision based on logic and data and risk assessment." She reached for his hand. "Maybe it's time I made a decision based on something else." "Like what?" "Like hope." Her voice was soft. "Like the possibility that I might actually get to be happy. Like the crazy idea that a single dad with a cramped apartment and a daughter who believes in unicorns might be exactly what I need." Daniel pulled her close, mindful of her still healing chest, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "For the record," he murmured, "Emma is going to be thrilled. And you?" "I'm terrified," he admitted. "I've never done this before. Any of this. The romance, the partnership, the taking on corporate conspiracies together. I have no idea what I'm doing." "That makes 2 of us." "Then we're perfectly matched." Alexandra laughed, that new laugh, the one that still surprised him every time he heard it. And for a moment, everything felt possible. Then her phone rang, shattering the peace. She answered it, and Daniel watched her face transform as she listened. The warmth drained away. The steel returned. By the time she ended the call, she was every inch the CEO who had terrified boardrooms for 18 years. "What is it?" Daniel asked. "That was Lisa, the consortium, Grant's backers. They've made their move." Her voice was ice. "They've initiated a hostile takeover attempt. They're buying up shares, rallying dissatisfied investors, preparing a proxy fight that could remove me from leadership permanently." "When?" "The shareholder meeting is in 3 weeks. Alexandra's jaw tightened. 3 weeks to defend everything my father built, everything we've fought for. Daniel felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. 3 weeks. It wasn't enough time for Alexandra to fully recover. It wasn't enough time to mount a proper defense. It was barely enough time to understand the scope of what they were facing. But it was the time they had. "Then we fight," he said simply. "They have resources we can't match. Political connections, media influence, enough money to bury us in legal challenges. They also have something they can't escape." Daniel met her eyes. "They're the villains of this story, Alexandra. And eventually people figure that out. We just have to make sure they figure it out before the shareholder vote." Alexandra stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, a dangerous smile crossed her face. "You know what I love about you, Daniel Reed?" "What?" "You make me believe we can actually win." She straightened in her chair, the last traces of vulnerability disappearing behind a mask of cold determination. This was the Alexandra Vale who had built an empire from the ashes of her father's dreams. The Alexandra Vale who had stared down death and refused to blink. The Alexandra Vale who was about to remind her enemies exactly who they were dealing with. "Call Lisa," she said. "Tell her we're moving up the timeline. The press conference happens tomorrow." "Tomorrow? But you're not even discharged yet." "Then we do it here, from the hospital. Let them see exactly what they're up against." Her eyes blazed with fierce light. "They wanted a fight. They're about to get one." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding dawning. This was the moment they'd been preparing for. The moment when Alexandra Vale stopped hiding and started attacking. And whatever came next, they would face it together. He reached for his phone to make the call. The war for Vale Industries had officially begun. The hospital conference room had never seen anything like this. Lisa Chen had worked through the night to transform the sterile space into something resembling a professional press venue. A backdrop bearing the Vale Industries logo hung behind a single podium. Camera crews from every major network jostled for position, their equipment cables snaking across the floor like a tangled nervous system. Reporters clutched notebooks and recording devices, their faces hungry with anticipation. And at the center of it all, seated in a wheelchair she'd insisted on using only for the entrance, Alexandra Vale prepared to go to war. Daniel stood beside her, just out of camera range, watching as she reviewed her notes one final time. She was still pale, still visibly recovering, but something in her bearing had changed overnight. The vulnerability she'd shown him in private moments had been locked away, replaced by the formidable presence that had made her legendary. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. "I've been ready for 18 years. Alexandra looked up at him, and for just a moment the mask slipped. He saw the woman beneath, scared, determined, fighting with everything she had. "Stay close?" "Always." She rose from the wheelchair, refusing the arm Daniel offered, and walked to the podium under her own power. The effort cost her. He could see it in the slight tremor of her hands, the careful way she gripped the podium's edge. But she stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes sweeping across the assembled press with cool authority. The room fell silent. "Good morning," Alexandra began, her voice clear and steady despite everything her body had endured. "I know there's been considerable speculation about my health and my future at Vale Industries. I'm here to address those concerns directly and to share some information that the American public deserves to know." She paused, letting the tension build. 3 months ago, I underwent experimental cardiac surgery to address a congenital heart defect I've lived with since childhood. The surgery was successful. I am recovering, and I have every intention of returning to my position as CEO of Vale Industries in full capacity. A murmur rippled through the press corps. Hands shot up, but Alexandra raised her own hand to forestall questions. "However, my health is not the most important story here today. The most important story is about a conspiracy, a coordinated effort by powerful corporate interests to seize control of Vale Industries and dismantle the affordable healthcare technology we've spent 2 decades developing." She pressed a button on the podium, and the screen behind her lit up with documents, photographs, financial records. What you're seeing is evidence of a consortium involving executives from 3 major pharmaceutical companies and 2 private equity firms. This consortium recruited Grant Mercer, my former CFO, to execute a takeover from within. When that failed, they moved to Plan B, a hostile takeover designed to strip Vale Industries for parts and bury our cardiac technology forever. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, the carefully maintained order dissolved into chaos. Alexandra let it happen for exactly 5 seconds before raising her hand again. I will take questions, but first, let me be absolutely clear about what's at stake. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Vale Industries' affordable cardiac monitoring technology has the potential to save millions of lives annually. Lives that pharmaceutical companies would prefer to monetize. Lives that private equity firms see only as data points on a profit projection. These people aren't just trying to take my company, they're trying to take hope away from every patient who can't afford the current standard of care. She met the cameras directly, and Daniel saw something in her expression that made his chest ache with pride. I won't let them. The questions came fast and fierce. Alexandra fielded them with the skill of someone who had been doing battle in boardrooms for nearly 2 decades. She named names. She cited specific documents. She laid out the conspiracy with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. And through it all, she never wavered. By the time the press conference ended 2 hours later, Alexandra was trembling with exhaustion. Daniel caught her as she stepped away from the podium, guiding her back to the wheelchair despite her protests. That was incredible, he said as he wheeled her toward the elevator. You destroyed them. I wounded them. Alexandra's voice was hoarse from speaking. Now we have to see if the wound is fatal. The response came faster than either of them had anticipated. Within hours of the press conference, the story had exploded across every news outlet in the country. Social media erupted with outrage. Shareholders began demanding answers. Politicians who had accepted campaign contributions from the implicated companies scrambled to return the money and distance themselves from the scandal. And in the Vale Industries boardroom, the phone would not stop ringing. Daniel fielded calls from investors, analysts, lawyers, and journalists, while Alexandra rested in her hospital room. Each call brought new information, a board member pledging support, an institutional investor pulling back from the consortium's proxy fight, a whistleblower from one of the pharmaceutical companies reaching out with additional evidence. The tide was turning, but the consortium wasn't finished. That evening, as Daniel sat beside Alexandra's bed reviewing the day's developments, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The number was familiar, the mysterious informant who had started all of this. They're accelerating the timeline. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow. They're going to try to remove Alexandra before the shareholders can weigh in. Daniel showed Alexandra the message. Her expression hardened. They're panicking, she said. The press conference hurt them more than they expected. Now they're trying to cut their losses before everything falls apart. Can they actually remove you? You're the majority shareholder. I'm the largest single shareholder, but not the majority. My father distributed ownership widely to prevent any one person from having absolute control, including himself. Alexandra sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. If enough board members vote against me, they can force me into an interim leave of absence pending a full shareholder vote. It would give them weeks to consolidate power, spin the narrative, pressure smaller shareholders to sell. So we stopped them at the board meeting. We don't even know who on the board is compromised. Alexandra's jaw tightened with frustration. I've spent 2 months trying to identify the moles, and I still can't be certain. Then we don't play defense. Daniel leaned forward, his mind racing through possibilities. We make them identify themselves. How? The same way you identified Grant. We give them something they can't resist, a piece of information so valuable they have to act on it. Then we watch who moves. Alexandra studied him with new appreciation. You're thinking like a strategist, not an analyst. I've had good teachers recently. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. What did you have in mind? Daniel outlined his plan. It was risky, perhaps riskier than anything they'd attempted so far. It required precise timing, complete commitment, and a willingness to bet everything on a single hand. It was exactly the kind of gamble Alexandra Vale had built her career on. Do it, she said when he finished. Set the trap. Daniel nodded and reached for his phone. The next 12 hours were a blur of preparation and misdirection. Lisa Chen proved invaluable, coordinating with trusted allies within the company to spread carefully crafted rumors. The story was simple. Alexandra Vale, exhausted from her press conference appearance, had suffered a setback. Her doctors were concerned. There was talk of moving up her departure from the hospital, not for recovery at home, but for transfer to a specialized facility. The implication was clear. Alexandra might not make it to the board meeting. If the consortium's moles believed she was incapacitated, they would move more boldly. They would reveal themselves. And when they did, Daniel would be watching. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:30, Daniel took his position in the company's security monitoring center, surrounded by screens showing every camera feed in the building. Lisa was at his side, her tablet connected to the company's internal communication systems. "Anything?" he asked. "Nothing yet. Everyone's arriving normally." Lisa's eyes darted across the screens. "Wait, there. Conference room B. That's not on the official schedule." Daniel watched as 3 board members filed into a small conference room on the executive floor. Margaret Chen, the head of operations, Robert Dalton, the senior independent director, and Victoria Ashworth, the chair of the compensation committee. All 3 were people Alexandra had trusted. "Can we get audio?" Daniel asked. Lisa's fingers flew across her tablet. "The room isn't wired, but I can access the phone system. If anyone makes a call..." As if on cue, Robert Dalton pulled out his phone. "Patching through now," Lisa said. The audio was tinny, but audible. Dalton's voice filled the security center. "It's happening. The press conference backfired. Our people are getting cold feet. We need to move now while she's still hospitalized." A response came from the phone's speaker, a voice Daniel didn't recognize. "The board vote? We have the numbers. Margaret and Victoria are solid. Patterson and Wu will follow if we present it as concern for Alexandra's health. By the time she's recovered enough to fight back, we'll have installed interim leadership." "And Reed?" "He's a placeholder, no real authority. Once Alexandra's out, we'll find a reason to remove him within the week." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Lisa put a hand on his arm, a silent reminder to stay focused. "What about the evidence she released?" the voice on the phone asked. "Spin. We're already working on a counter-narrative, disgruntled CEO, facing mortality, making wild accusations to protect her legacy. The public has a short memory. By Christmas, no one will remember." "The consortium is prepared to proceed?" "They're waiting for our signal. Once the board votes, they'll announce the tender offer. 48 hours later, Vale Industries will be under new management." The call ended. Daniel looked at Lisa. "Did you get all of that?" She held up her tablet, showing the recording progress bar. "Every word." "Then let's end this." The boardroom fell silent when Daniel walked in. 11 directors sat around the polished table, their faces arranged in various expressions of surprise and concern. At the head of the table, Margaret Chen had already taken the chair that should have been Alexandra's, a symbolic claim to leadership that set Daniel's teeth on edge. "Mr. Reed," Margaret said smoothly, "we weren't expecting you. Given the circumstances, we assumed you'd be at the hospital with Alexandra." "I'm exactly where I need to be." Daniel took his place at the table, the seat reserved for the interim CEO. "And I have an announcement that I think the board will find interesting." "This isn't the appropriate forum for..." "It's exactly the appropriate forum." Daniel pulled out his phone and set it on the table. "Because what I have to share concerns every person in this room." He pressed play. Robert Dalton's voice filled the boardroom, clear and damning. The conversation played out in excruciating detail: the conspiracy, the planned vote, the consortium's tender offer. The board members who weren't involved listened with growing horror. The ones who were, Margaret, Robert, Victoria, sat frozen, their faces draining of color. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. "That recording was obtained illegally," Robert finally managed. "It's inadmissible. It proves nothing." "In court, perhaps," Daniel agreed. "But we're not in court. We're in a boardroom, and I think our fellow directors have heard enough to form their own conclusions." He looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. Alexandra Vale built this company on the principle that healthcare should be a right, not a privilege. She spent her entire adult life fighting for that vision, first against skeptics who said it couldn't be done, then against competitors who wanted to crush her, and now against a conspiracy that would rather see her dead than see her succeed. Daniel's voice rose with conviction. "She nearly died 3 months ago. She's still recovering, and yet she stood before the press yesterday and exposed the people trying to destroy everything she's built, because she believes in this company and in the lives it can save." He turned to face Margaret, Robert, and Victoria directly. "The question now is, what do you believe in? Because if it's money, if it's power, if it's whatever the consortium promised you, then you're in the wrong room. This is Vale Industries. We save lives here, and we don't surrender to people who would trade those lives for profit. The moment stretched. Then Harrison Wu, a soft-spoken director who had sat silent through the entire confrontation, cleared his throat. I move that we table all discussion of leadership changes until Alexandra Vale is sufficiently recovered to participate personally, he said. Furthermore, I move that we open an immediate investigation into the conduct of any board members who may have colluded with outside parties against the company's interests. Seconded, said another director, then another, then a chorus of voices around the table. Margaret Chen's face twisted with fury. She looked at Robert and Victoria, seeking support, but both had gone pale and silent, rats recognizing a sinking ship. This isn't over, Margaret said, rising from the chair she'd claimed. The consortium has resources you can't imagine. They'll do nothing. The voice came from the doorway. Every head turned. Alexandra Vale stood at the entrance to the boardroom, one hand braced against the doorframe, the other clutching a folder of documents. She was dressed in a simple charcoal suit, not her usual power attire, but elegant enough to project authority. Her face was pale with effort, but her eyes blazed with the fierce intelligence that had built an empire. Alexandra, Daniel said, moving instinctively toward her. You should be resting. I've rested long enough. She walked into the room, each step deliberate and measured. Dr. Harrison cleared me this morning, conditionally, against his better judgment. A thin smile crossed her face. He knows me well enough to understand that trying to keep me away from this meeting would have done more damage than letting me attend. She reached the head of the table, her rightful place, and stood before the chair Margaret had vacated. For a moment, she simply looked at it. Then she sat down, the gesture carrying the weight of reclaimed authority. Daniel has already shared the evidence we've gathered, Alexandra said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. But there's more. The folder I'm holding contains financial records, communication logs, and sworn statements from witnesses within the consortium's own organization. People who decided that participating in the destruction of a healthcare company was more than their conscience could bear. She opened the folder and began distributing documents around the table. These materials have already been provided to the FBI, the SEC, and the Department of Justice. Federal investigators will be reaching out to several people in this room within the next 48 hours. Her gaze settled on Margaret, Robert, and Victoria. I would strongly suggest that any board members with relevant information consider cooperating fully with those investigations. Robert Dalton's composure finally cracked. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't prove any of this, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's hearsay. Fabrication. You're a dying woman grasping at... I'm a dying woman? Alexandra's laugh was cold and sharp. Robert, I've been dying since I was 16 years old. Every single day I've woken up wondering if this would be the one that killed me. And you know what I've learned from that? She stood, placing her hands flat on the table, leaning toward him with controlled fury. I've learned that the dying have nothing left to fear. I've learned that when you've stared down death often enough, the threats of small, greedy men stop meaning anything at all. And I've learned that the best way to live, really live, is to fight for something worth dying for. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silent room like thunder. Vale Industries is worth dying for. The lives we save are worth dying for. And you, Robert, you and your consortium, you are not worth a single beat of my damaged heart. Robert's face contorted. For a moment, Daniel thought he might lunge across the table, but something in Alexandra's expression stopped him, something ancient and implacable, the look of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. He turned and walked out of the boardroom without another word. Margaret and Victoria followed moments later. Alexandra watched them go, then slowly sank back into her chair. The effort of the confrontation had cost her. Daniel could see it in the tremor of her hands, the slight grayness around her lips. But she held herself upright, refusing to show weakness until the threat had passed. I believe, she said, addressing the remaining board members, we have a motion on the floor regarding an investigation. Shall we vote? The motion passed unanimously. The meeting adjourned an hour later after a series of emergency measures had been approved: enhanced security protocols, accelerated timeline for the cardiac technology rollout, formation of a special committee to oversee the investigation into board misconduct. Daniel walked beside Alexandra as she made her way slowly back to the elevator. She leaned on him more heavily than she probably wanted to, but she didn't push him away. "That was reckless," he said quietly. "You could have collapsed in there." "But I didn't. You got lucky." "I got stubborn." She looked up at him with a tired smile. "There's a difference." The elevator arrived. They stepped inside, and the moment the doors closed, Alexandra's composure cracked. She sagged against Daniel, her breath coming in short gasps, her whole body trembling with exhaustion. Hey, I've got you." He wrapped his arms around her, supporting her weight. "You did it. It's over." "It's not over," she whispered. "The consortium is still out there. Margaret and Robert will flip, try to cut deals, but the people above them will be dealt with by the FBI, by the SEC, by the full weight of the federal government, which is now very interested in pharmaceutical companies conspiring to suppress affordable health care." Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You don't have to fight every battle yourself anymore, Alexandra. You've got allies now. You've got a team. You've got me." She was quiet for a moment, then very softly, "I don't know how to do that. Let other people carry the weight." "You learn, one day at a time." He tilted her chin up so she could see his eyes. "Starting with today. Today, you let me take you home. You rest. You recover. And tomorrow, we figure out the next step together." "Home," she repeated. The word seemed to puzzle her. I'm not sure where that is anymore." Daniel smiled. "I have some ideas." The apartment was quiet when they arrived. Mrs. Patterson had taken Emma to the park, giving Daniel and Alexandra time to settle in without the whirlwind of 6-year-old energy. Daniel guided Alexandra to the couch, the same worn, second-hand couch where she'd sat soaking wet just months ago, and made her comfortable with pillows and blankets. "This is temporary," Alexandra said, looking around the modest space. "Until we figure out something more permanent." "It's not much," Daniel admitted. 3 bedrooms would be generous. 2 bedrooms and a converted closet is more accurate. Emma's room barely fits her bed and her bookshelf, and the kitchen— "Daniel," Alexandra caught his hand, "stop apologizing." "I'm not apologizing. I'm setting expectations." "You're apologizing for not having a penthouse." She pulled him down to sit beside her. "I had a penthouse. It was 2,000 square feet of cold, empty space where I slept alone every night and ate breakfast alone every morning and worked until I couldn't see straight because there was nothing else to do." She looked around the apartment, at the crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, the toys scattered near the door, the evidence of a life actually being lived. "This is better. This is what a home looks like." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. "You might change your mind when you see the water pressure in the shower." "I'll adapt." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm good at adapting." They sat together in comfortable silence as the afternoon light shifted through the windows. The sounds of the city drifted up from the street below: traffic, voices, the endless hum of urban life. It was strange, Daniel thought, how quickly this had become normal. How quickly Alexandra Vale, CEO and billionaire, had become simply Alexandra, the woman he couldn't imagine living without. "Daniel," she said finally. "Yeah? What happens now?" It was a bigger question than it sounded. Daniel understood that. She was asking about more than logistics, more than recovery schedules and board meetings and federal investigations. She was asking about them, about the future they'd been building in stolen moments and whispered conversations. "Now," he said slowly, "you get better. The company stabilizes. The consortium gets what's coming to them." He paused. "And we figure out what this is." "What we are, you mean?" "Yeah." He turned to look at her. "I know it's fast. I know it doesn't make sense on paper. 6 months ago, I was invisible to you, just a name on an employee roster." "You were never invisible," Alexandra said quietly. "I told you. I noticed you, years ago. I just didn't understand why. And now? Now I think I understand." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled jaw. You're the first person who ever saw me. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the dying woman with the power to change lives. Just me, scared and stubborn and so tired of being alone. You're not alone anymore. No. Her voice was thick. I'm not. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway shattered the moment. Emma burst through the front door, Mrs. Patterson trailing behind with a bemused expression. Daddy, you're home, and the storm lady is here. Emma launched herself at the couch, barely avoiding collision with Alexandra. Are you staying for dinner? Please say you're staying for dinner. Mrs. Patterson made cookies, but I saved some for you. Alexandra laughed, that surprised, delighted laugh that Daniel was learning to love. I would be honored to stay for dinner. And breakfast? Emma, Daniel said gently. What? I just want to know if she'll be here for pancakes. You make the best pancakes, Daddy. She should know. Alexandra looked at Daniel, her eyes warm. I've heard wonderful things about your pancakes. They're acceptable. He's being modest, Mrs. Patterson interjected from the doorway. They're excellent, almost as good as mine, which is saying something. She smiled at Alexandra. It's nice to finally meet you properly, Ms. Vale. I've heard a great deal. Good things, I hope. Mostly, Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled. Some concerns about your tendency toward workaholism, but I'm told you're working on that. Alexandra glanced at Daniel. I have a very insistent support team. The evening that followed was nothing like Daniel had experienced before. It was chaotic and messy and wonderfully ordinary. Emma demanded that Alexandra read her a bedtime story. 3 stories, actually, because she was very good at negotiations. Mrs. Patterson stayed for dinner, filling the small kitchen with warmth and laughter and the smell of her famous pot roast. And through it all, Daniel watched Alexandra transform. The CEO disappeared entirely. In her place was a woman who laughed at Emma's jokes, who asked Mrs. Patterson about her grandchildren, who dried dishes with the careful attention she usually reserved for quarterly reports. She wasn't performing. She wasn't managing her image. She was simply being, present and alive and part of something bigger than herself. Later, after Emma was asleep and Mrs. Patterson had gone home, Daniel found Alexandra standing at the window, looking out at the city lights. Credit for your thoughts, he asked, joining her. I was thinking about my father. Her voice was soft. He died before he could see what Vale Industries became, before he could see the lives we've saved, the technology we've developed, before he could see any of it. I'm sure he'd be proud. Maybe, I hope so. She turned to face him. But I was also thinking about what he missed by dying too young. He never saw me grow up, never met the people who would become important to me, never got to be a grandfather. Her eyes glistened. I used to think that when you were dying, the only thing that mattered was legacy, the mark you left on the world. But now I think what matters is the people you love, the moments you share with them, the ordinary, beautiful, everyday moments that don't make it into history books. She reached for his hand. I want those moments, Daniel. I want to be there when Emma loses her first tooth. I want to fall asleep on this terrible couch, watching movies we've seen 100 times. I want to burn pancakes and argue about whose turn it is to do dishes and have the same conversation about nothing important that couples have been having for thousands of years. That sounds like a life, Daniel said. It sounds like a home. Her voice cracked. I've never had one. Not really. But I want one. With you. With Emma. With whatever comes next. Daniel pulled her close, careful of her still healing chest. Then let's build one. Together. It won't be easy. The company, my health, the investigations. I know. And I'm difficult, stubborn, used to doing things my own way. I know that too. I might drive you crazy. You already do. He smiled against her hair, but in the best possible way. She laughed softly. So this is it? We're really doing this? We're really doing this. They stood together at the window, watching the city lights glitter in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, board meetings and medical appointments, and the endless work of rebuilding a company and a life. But tonight, in this quiet moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the woman in his arms. What mattered was the choice they'd made to face the future together. What mattered was home. The weeks that followed tested everything they'd built. Alexandra's recovery continued, though not in a straight line. There were good days when she felt almost normal, when she could work for hours and walk without support and forget, momentarily, what her body had endured. And there were bad days when the fatigue crushed her, when pain radiated through her chest, when the experimental treatment revealed its limitations. Through it all, Daniel was there. He adjusted his schedule at Vail Industries to work from home whenever possible, setting up a makeshift office in the corner of the living room. He coordinated with Dr. Harrison on Alexandra's treatment protocol, becoming as familiar with cardiac rehabilitation as he was with financial projections. He learned to read her moods, when she needed space, when she needed company, when she needed someone to simply sit beside her and say nothing at all. And Emma, in her 6-year-old wisdom, understood things that adults often missed. One evening, Daniels came home to find Emma curled up on the couch with Alexandra, both of them absorbed in a picture book about a princess who refused to be rescued. "She's reading to me," Alexandra explained when she noticed him watching. "Apparently my voice is too tired today." "The princess's voice is tired too," Emma added seriously, "from fighting all the dragons. But that's okay. You can rest, and I'll tell you what happens." That sounds like an excellent arrangement. Later, after Emma was asleep, Alexandra told Daniel what had happened. She'd had a particularly difficult afternoon. Chest pain, shortness of breath, the creeping fear that the surgery hadn't worked as well as everyone hoped. She'd been on the verge of panic when Emma had noticed, climbed onto the couch beside her, and announced that she knew exactly what to do. She said that when she's scared, Eleanor, the stuffed elephant, tells her stories until she feels better, Alexandra said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And since I don't have an Eleanor, she would be my Eleanor for a while. She's something special, isn't she? She's extraordinary. Alexandra's voice was fierce. And she's going to change the world someday, just like her father. Daniel blinked. I haven't changed anything. You changed me. She took his hand. You changed everything. The consortium's legal troubles accelerated as the federal investigation widened. Margaret Chen, facing the prospect of prison time, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony implicated executives at 3 major pharmaceutical companies and 2 private equity firms, triggering a cascade of arrests and resignations that made national headlines. Robert Dalton fled the country before he could be arrested, only to be apprehended at Heathrow Airport, trying to board a flight to a country without an extradition treaty. Victoria Ashworth, perhaps wisely, hired the best lawyers money could buy and began negotiating her own cooperation agreement. And at the center of it all, Vail Industries not only survived, but thrived. The publicity from Alexandra's press conference had transformed the company's public image. Instead of being seen as just another healthcare corporation, Vail Industries became a symbol of integrity. David standing up to Goliath, fighting for patients against corporate greed. Stock prices climbed. Partnerships multiplied. The Affordable Cardiac Technology Program received funding from sources that had previously been inaccessible. 6 months after her surgery, Alexandra walked into the Vail Industries boardroom for her first official day back as CEO. Daniel was there, of course. He'd spent the previous 6 months in a role that defied easy description, part interim CEO, part strategic advisor, part protector of Alexandra's vision while she recovered. Now, as she reclaimed her rightful position, he found himself uncertain about where he fit. "You look nervous," Alexandra said as they approached the boardroom doors. "I'm not nervous. I'm recalibrating." Recalibrating. "I got used to running things, making decisions, being responsible for the company's direction." He met her eyes. "I'm trying to figure out how to step back gracefully." Alexandra stopped walking. "Who said anything about stepping back?" "I'm a financial analyst, Alexandra. 3rd floor, cubicle near the window. That's who I was before all this started. And now you're the person who saved my company while I was dying. The person who outsmarted a conspiracy that had been building for years. The person who stood in front of a board of directors and showed more leadership in 5 minutes than most executives demonstrate in a career." She took his hand. "You're not going back to a cubicle, Daniel. You're staying right here. With me." "In what capacity?" "Chief Strategy Officer." She smiled at his stunned expression. I've already cleared it with the board. They were surprisingly enthusiastic. Something about you being the only person who's proven they can run this company without destroying it. Alexandra, you can accept gracefully, or you can argue with me. I should warn you that I'm very good at arguments, and I've had 6 months of rest to sharpen my skills. Daniel laughed, despite himself. Chief Strategy Officer. It comes with a significant raise, an actual office, and, her eyes sparkled, close proximity to the CEO, which I'm told has its own benefits. What kind of benefits? I suppose you'll have to accept the position to find out. He looked at her. This woman who had walked into his life on a stormy night and turned everything upside down. This woman who had shown him that courage came in many forms, that strength could coexist with vulnerability, that love could grow in the most unexpected places. Yes, he said. I accept. Excellent. She leaned up and kissed him, brief but meaningful. Now, let's go run a company. The boardroom erupted in applause when they walked in together. The months that followed brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. The affordable cardiac technology rolled out ahead of schedule, transforming healthcare access in underserved communities across the country. The first life saved by a Vail Industries heart monitor was a grandmother in rural Montana who'd had no access to specialized cardiac care. When her family sent a thank you letter to the company, Alexandra had it framed and hung in the lobby. The consortium's trials made national news, exposing the depth of corruption in the pharmaceutical industry and triggering reforms that would reshape healthcare policy for generations. Alexandra testified before Congress, her testimony eloquent and damning, her mere presence a reminder that some fights were worth fighting. And at home, because they had a home now, a real one. Life continued in its ordinary, extraordinary way. Daniel's apartment had proven too small for 3 people, and Alexandra's recovery needs, so they'd found a new place together. Not a penthouse, Alexandra had insisted. Something real. Something that felt like a family lived there. They'd chosen a brownstone in Lincoln Park. 4 bedrooms, a backyard big enough for Emma to play in, a kitchen where Daniel could make his famous pancakes on Saturday mornings. Alexandra had wanted to pay for it outright, but Daniel had insisted on contributing what he could, and they'd found a compromise that felt right to both of them. Emma adjusted to the new arrangement with the resilience that only children possess. Within weeks, she was calling Alexandra Alex and demanding to be included in their Saturday movie nights and asking when they were going to get a dog. A dog? Alexandra had looked at Daniel with something like panic. Every kid needs a dog, Emma had explained patiently. It's in the rules. What rules? Kid rules. You wouldn't understand. You're a grown-up. They got a dog. A golden retriever puppy named Captain, who proceeded to chew through 3 pairs of Daniel's shoes and 1 extremely expensive Italian leather handbag before they successfully trained him. Alexandra took it in stride. She was learning, Daniel realized, to take many things in stride. The chaos of family life, the unpredictability of loving people who didn't follow agendas or schedules, the vulnerability of letting herself be truly known. 1 year after that stormy night, Alexandra's cardiac team declared her in full recovery. The experimental treatment had exceeded all expectations. Her heart, once a ticking time bomb, was now functioning at near normal capacity. Barring unforeseen complications, she could expect a full and healthy life. She called Daniel from the doctor's office, her voice thick with emotion. I'm going to live, she said. Really live. Not just survive. Not just fight to see another day. Live. I know, he said. I always knew. How could you know? The odds were... I knew because you're Alexandra Vail, and Alexandra Vail doesn't lose. That night, after Emma was asleep and Captain was snoring in his bed and the house was quiet, Alexandra found Daniel on the back porch, looking up at the stars. What are you thinking about? She asked, settling beside him. The night you showed up at my door, how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was about to get very complicated. Were you right? Very. He smiled at her. Best complication I ever had. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I never properly answered your question, you know. What question? When you told me I was beautiful, you said I was extraordinary, fierce, the kind of person who changes the world. She looked up at him. You were wrong about one thing. What's that? You said I was the most extraordinary person you'd ever met, but you're wrong. Emma is. She smiled. And you're pretty extraordinary yourself. I'm ordinary. We established that. Ordinary people don't save dying CEOs. Ordinary people don't stand up to corporate conspiracies. Ordinary people don't take in broken strangers and help them remember how to live. She cupped his face in her hands. You're the most extraordinary, ordinary person I've ever known, and I love you for it. Daniel felt his heart swell. I love you too. Good, she kissed him, because I'm planning to keep you around for a very long time. How long? Forever, if you'll have me. He pretended to consider it. Forever's a pretty big commitment. I'm aware. I've done the analysis. And what did your analysis conclude? That the risk-adjusted returns of a lifetime with you significantly outweigh any potential alternatives. She grinned. Also that I can't imagine waking up without you beside me, but mostly the returns thing. Daniel laughed and pulled her close. Forever it is, then. Above them the stars wheeled through the infinite darkness. Below, the city hummed with a million stories, a million lives, a million hearts beating toward an uncertain future. But here, in this quiet moment, two people who had found each other against all odds made a promise that would shape the rest of their lives. Not a grand gesture, not a dramatic declaration, just a simple truth, spoken in the darkness. Forever. And they meant it. The promise of forever was tested sooner than either of them expected. 3 months after Alexandra's clean bill of health, Grant Mercer resurfaced. He'd been released on bail pending his trial, his lawyers having argued successfully that he posed no flight risk with his assets frozen and his passport confiscated. The legal system, in its measured wisdom, had deemed him sufficiently contained. The legal system was wrong. Daniel was in his office at Vail Industries when Lisa Chen burst through the door, her face pale with alarm. He's filing, she said without preamble. Grant, he's filing a countersuit against Alexandra personally. Defamation, intentional interference with business relationships, and, she hesitated, fraud. Fraud? He's claiming the evidence we released was fabricated, that Alexandra orchestrated the entire conspiracy narrative to cover up her own financial misconduct. Lisa's hands were shaking. Daniel, he's got documentation. Bank records, communications, testimony from former employees. I don't know how, but he's built a case. Daniel's blood ran cold. That's impossible. We have the original evidence. We have federal investigators who verified everything. He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to win in public opinion. If he can create enough doubt, enough confusion. Lisa stopped, the implication hanging heavy in the air. The shareholder meeting was in 2 weeks. Vail Industries' stock had been climbing steadily since Alexandra's return, but investor confidence was fragile. Any hint of scandal, any suggestion that the company's leadership couldn't be trusted, could trigger a sell-off that would undo everything they'd built. Grant Mercer might be going to prison, but he intended to burn everything down on his way there. Daniel found Alexandra in the executive conference room, surrounded by lawyers and crisis communications specialists. She looked up when he entered, and he saw immediately that she already knew. Lisa told you, she said. Yeah. He crossed to stand beside her. How bad is it? Bad enough that our legal team has been arguing for the past hour about whether we should settle. Settle? With Grant Mercer? After everything he did? Settling would make this go away quietly. No public trial, no extended media coverage, no opportunity for Grant to keep poisoning the well. One of the lawyers, a senior partner named Harrison, spoke with the weary pragmatism of someone who'd seen too many corporate battles. It's not about justice, Mr. Reed. It's about protecting the company. It's about surrendering, Alexandra said flatly. Admitting that we can be bullied, sending a message that anyone who attacks Vail Industries can buy their way out of consequences. With respect, Ms. Vail, the alternative is a prolonged legal battle that will dominate headlines for months. Even if we win, when we win, the damage to our reputation could be severe. And if we settle, the damage to our integrity is certain. Alexandra's voice was steel. I didn't survive a heart transplant and a corporate conspiracy to cave to a man who tried to have me killed. The room fell silent. Daniel looked at the lawyers, at the communications specialists, at all the professionals who dealt in calculated risks and managed outcomes. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. This wasn't about legal strategy or public relations. This was about something deeper, about who Alexandra Vale was and what Vale Industries stood for. "We fight," Daniel said. "That's not a question. The only question is how." Alexandra met his eyes, and something passed between them, a shared understanding that transcended words. "Everyone out," she said, "except Daniel. I need to think." The room emptied. When they were alone, Alexandra sank into her chair, the mask of confident leadership slipping to reveal the exhausted woman beneath. "He's not going to stop," she said quietly. "Even from prison, even if he loses everything. Grant will spend the rest of his life trying to destroy me." "Then we make sure he can't." Daniel sat beside her. "What does he want? Really want? Beyond revenge, beyond hurting you, what's driving this?" Alexandra was silent for a long moment. "Control. He's always wanted control. Over the company, over me, over the narrative. He can't stand that I survived. That I won. That everything he built came crashing down while I'm still standing. So we take away his control. Completely. Not just in court. Everywhere." "How?" Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, discarding options, searching for leverage. And then, suddenly, he found it. "The consortium," he said. "Grant's partners. The ones who funded his scheme, who promised him a position in the new order once Vale Industries fell. They're still out there. Most of them cut deals, paid fines, walked away with their fortunes intact. They got off easy because Grant took the fall." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Grant Mercer isn't just angry at you. He's angry at them too. They used him, abandoned him, let him become the face of a conspiracy they all participated in." Daniel leaned forward. "What if we gave him a way to hurt them instead of us?" Alexandra's eyes narrowed. "You want to turn him. I want to offer him a choice. He can spend the rest of his legal career fighting a battle he can't win against a company that will never stop defending itself. Or he can redirect his considerable talents toward the people who actually betrayed him, and maybe, just maybe, find some redemption in the process." Grant Mercer doesn't want redemption. Everyone wants redemption, even if they don't know it. Daniel took her hand. "You taught me that. When you showed up at my door, when you asked if you were beautiful, you were looking for something, a reason to keep fighting, a reason to believe you were more than your illness, your company, your power. Grant's looking for that too. He just doesn't have anyone to help him find it." Alexandra stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile crossed her face. Not warm, but sharp with strategic appreciation. "You want to save Grant Mercer. I want to neutralize him. If saving him is what it takes, I can live with that. And if it doesn't work, if he's too far gone, too consumed by hatred, then we fight the traditional way. Lawyers, courts, public opinion. We've done it before." Daniel squeezed her hand. "But I think it's worth trying. I think there's a version of this story where everyone doesn't have to lose." Alexandra was quiet, weighing the proposal against everything she knew about Grant, about human nature, about the capacity for change. Finally, she nodded. "Set up a meeting, somewhere private, just him and me." "You and him?" "Alexandra, that's necessary." Her voice was firm. "If this is going to work, he needs to hear it from me. Not lawyers, not intermediaries. Me. The person he spent years trying to destroy." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from the man who had caused so much pain, but he recognized the look in her eyes, the same fierce determination that had carried her through surgery, through conspiracy, through every impossible challenge she'd faced. "I'll arrange it," he said. "But I'm going to be there, in the room, non-negotiable. I wouldn't have it any other way." The meeting took place 3 days later in a private conference room at a neutral law firm downtown. Grant Mercer arrived flanked by attorneys, his appearance carefully managed despite months of legal battles. He looked older than Daniel remembered, the polished confidence replaced by something harder and more desperate. But his eyes? His eyes were the same, cold, calculating, dangerous. "Alexandra?" Grant's voice was silk over steel. "You look well, remarkable really, considering." "Considering you tried to have me killed?" Alexandra didn't flinch. Yes, I suppose it is remarkable. Alleged. Everything is alleged until proven in court. He smiled thinly. Speaking of which, shall we discuss my lawsuit? I'm told your lawyers are very eager to make this unpleasantness disappear. Your lawsuit is a waste of everyone's time, including yours. We both know the evidence is real. We both know what you did. Alexandra leaned forward. What I'm interested in is why you're still fighting when you've already lost. Lost? Grant laughed. I haven't lost anything. I've been temporarily inconvenienced. The difference is significant. The consortium abandoned you. Your allies turned state's evidence. You're facing years in prison, and the people who promised you power are sipping champagne in their penthouses while you prepare for trial. Alexandra's voice was relentless. You didn't just lose, Grant. You were sacrificed, and you know it. Something flickered in Grant's expression, a crack in the armor he'd maintained so carefully. Daniel watched it spread, watched the suppressed rage and humiliation surface for just a moment before Grant regained control. What's your point? My point is that you're wasting your energy on the wrong target. I'm not your enemy, Grant. I never was. I was just the obstacle between you and what you wanted. The real enemy, the people who used you and discarded you, they're still out there, still winning, still getting away with everything. And what do you suggest I do about it? Alexandra slid a folder across the table. Testify. Against all of them. Not just the ones who've already been caught, the ones who are still hiding, the executives who approved the conspiracy, the board members who looked the other way, the investors who knew exactly what they were funding. Grant didn't touch the folder. In exchange for what? Reduced charges. Minimum security facility and, Alexandra paused, my personal guarantee that when you get out, there will be a place for you. Not at Vale Industries, obviously, but somewhere. A chance to rebuild. You're offering me redemption. Grant's voice was mocking. How touching. I'm offering you a choice. You can spend the next decade in prison, nursing your hatred, watching the people who betrayed you prosper while you rot. Or you can take them down with you and come out the other side with something left to live for. The silence stretched. Daniel held his breath, watching the battle play out across Grant's face. Pride versus pragmatism, revenge versus survival. Finally, Grant reached for the folder. He read through it slowly, methodically, his expression revealing nothing. When he finished, he looked up at Alexandra with something that might have been respect. You've thought this through. I've had time. Hospital beds are good for planning. And if I say no? If I walk out of here and continue my lawsuit? Then we destroy you. Slowly, thoroughly, completely. Not because I want to, because you'll leave us no choice. Alexandra's voice softened slightly. I'm not asking you to like me, Grant. I'm not asking you to forgive what happened between us. I'm asking you to be smart, to recognize that we have a common enemy, and to help me finish what we started. Grant was silent for a long moment. Then he did something Daniel had never seen him do. He laughed. A real laugh, surprised and almost admiring. You know what I always underestimated about you, Alexandra? Your ruthlessness. I thought you were soft, principled, easy to manipulate because you cared about things like integrity and mission. He shook his head. I was wrong. You're as ruthless as any of us. You just hide it better. I prefer to think of it as strategic compassion. Call it whatever you want. Grant closed the folder and stood. I'll need time to consider. 24 hours. You have 12. His eyes narrowed, then he nodded curtly. 12 hours. You'll have my answer. He left without another word, his lawyers trailing behind like confused satellites. When they were alone, Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was either brilliant or insane. Possibly both. Alexandra slumped slightly in her chair. He'll take the deal. How can you be sure? Because he's smart enough to know I'm right. The consortium betrayed him. They let him take the fall while they protected themselves. And Grant Mercer, whatever else he is, does not forgive betrayal. She was right. 11 hours later, Grant's lawyers called to accept the terms. The subsequent weeks brought revelations that shook the corporate world to its foundations. Grant Mercer, once the architect of conspiracy, became its most devastating critic. His testimony implicated executives at levels no one had suspected, triggering investigations that reached into the highest echelons of American business. The consortium didn't just fall, it collapsed entirely, taking with it careers, fortunes, and reputations that had seemed untouchable. And through it all, Vail Industries stood firm, stronger than before, validated by truth. Daniel watched Alexandra navigate the aftermath with quiet awe. She had found a way to defeat her enemy by offering him something better than revenge. She had turned hatred into alliance, destruction into justice. "You know what you did, don't you?" he asked her one evening as they walked home through streets golden with autumn light. "What did I do?" "You saved him. Grant. Despite everything, you gave him a chance to be something other than what he'd become." Alexandra was quiet for a moment. "I gave him a choice. What he does with it is up to him." "But you hoped. You hoped he'd choose better." She looked at him with eyes that held depths he was still learning to navigate. "Someone once showed me that hope was possible, that being strong didn't mean being alone, that asking for help wasn't weakness." She took his hand. "I figured Grant deserved the same chance." Daniel pulled her close as they walked, the city bustling around them, the future stretching ahead full of possibility. "You're remarkable," he said. "So I've been told." She smiled. "By a very reliable source." 1 year later, the world looked different. Vail Industries' breakthrough cardiac technology had transformed global healthcare in ways that exceeded even Alexandra's most ambitious projections. The affordable heart monitors were now in clinics across 47 countries, saving lives that would have been lost to poverty and inaccessibility just months before. The stem cell treatment that had saved Alexandra's life had been refined, tested, and approved for wider use, offering hope to thousands of patients who had been told their conditions were untreatable. And on a crisp October evening, exactly 1 year after that stormy night when everything changed, Alexandra Vail stood on the balcony of the brownstone she now called home, looking out at the Chicago skyline she had nearly died protecting. Daniel found her there, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Emma's finally asleep," he said, joining her at the railing. "She made me promise to wake her up if any shooting stars appear. Apparently there's a meteor shower tonight." "There is." Alexandra accepted the champagne with a smile. "I checked." "Of course you did." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights glitter against the darkening sky. The sounds of urban life drifted up from below, traffic, distant music, the eternal hum of a metropolis that never truly slept. "I got a call today," Alexandra said finally, "from the Nobel Committee." Daniel nearly dropped his glass. "The Nobel Committee?" "They're nominating Vail Industries for the Peace Prize, something about our contribution to global health equity." She said it casually, as though discussing the weather, but Daniel could see the emotion she was trying to contain. "They want me to give a speech in Stockholm in December." "Alexandra, that's—" Words failed him. "That's incredible. It's terrifying." She laughed softly. "I've stood before Congress. I've faced down corporate conspiracies. I've testified in trials that made international headlines. But a Nobel Prize speech?" She shook her head. "I have no idea what to say." "You'll figure it out. You always do. Will you come with me? To Stockholm?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Daniel moved closer, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Besides, Emma's been asking about snow. Apparently Chicago doesn't get enough of the right kind." "There's a right kind of snow?" "According to our daughter, yes, Swedish snow is supposedly superior. She read it in a book." Alexandra went very still. "Our daughter?" Daniel realized what he'd said. The word had slipped out naturally, without thought, because that's what Emma had become to both of them over the past year. But they'd never discussed it formally, never put a label on the relationship that had grown between Alexandra and the little girl who had offered her a stuffed elephant in her darkest hour. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to assume. Don't apologize." Alexandra's voice was thick. "Don't ever apologize for that." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "She asked me something last week, when you were working late." "What did she ask?" "She asked if I was going to be her mom." Alexandra's voice cracked. "She said that her real mom left and never came back, but I came in a storm and stayed. She said that made me better than a real mom. She said, Alexandra stopped, overwhelmed. Daniel felt his own eyes sting. What did you tell her? I told her I would be honored if that was something you wanted too. Alexandra. He set down his champagne glass and took both her hands in his. I've wanted that since the night you asked me if you were beautiful. I've wanted that since I watched you stand up to Grant Mercer in a boardroom while your heart was failing. I've wanted that since Emma put a paper crown on your head and you wore it like it was made of diamonds. Daniel, I love you. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the woman who's about to win a Nobel Prize. You. The person who showed up at my door scared and alone and somehow found the courage to keep fighting. The person who taught me that strength isn't about never needing help. It's about being brave enough to ask for it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Alexandra's breath caught. I've been carrying this around for 3 months, Daniel admitted, waiting for the right moment, waiting until everything was perfect. But I realized something today. What? Perfect doesn't exist, not in business, not in life, not in love. What exists is this: 2 people who found each other against impossible odds, who fought through everything that tried to tear them apart, who built something real out of chaos and fear and stubborn hope. He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that caught the starlight. Alexandra Vale, will you marry me? The tears she'd been holding back finally fell, but she was smiling, that radiant, surprised smile that still took his breath away every time he saw it. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Daniel slid the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms and he was kissing her, and the city sparkled below them like it was celebrating too. When they finally broke apart, Alexandra laughed, that pure, joyful sound that had become his favorite music. Emma's going to be impossible tomorrow. She's been dropping hints about wanting to be a flower girl for months. You knew? She's 6. Subtlety isn't her strong suit. Alexandra held up her hand, watching the diamond catch the light. I never thought I'd have this. Any of this. A family, a future. Someone who sees me, really sees me, and loves me anyway. Not anyway, Daniel corrected. Because I love you because of who you are. All of it. The strength and the vulnerability. The CEO and the woman who reads bedtime stories in funny voices. The fighter and the person who still gets scared sometimes. I'm scared right now. Of what? Of being this happy. Her voice dropped. I spent so long preparing to die. Building walls. Keeping everyone at a distance so it wouldn't hurt as much when I was gone. And now, she gestured at the life they'd built. Now I have everything I never let myself want, and I'm terrified it's going to disappear. Daniel cupped her face in his hands. It's not going to disappear. I'm not going anywhere. Emma's not going anywhere. This life we're building, it's real, it's solid, and it's going to last. You can't know that. No, I can't know anything for certain. Nobody can. He smiled gently. But I can promise you that whatever comes, good days and bad days, challenges and triumphs, everything, we'll face it together. That's what family means. That's what love means. Alexandra leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. I used to think strength meant standing alone. I remember. You told me that once. I was wrong. She looked up at him. Real strength is letting someone stand with you. You taught me that. We taught each other. They stayed on the balcony until the first meteor streaked across the sky, a brilliant flash of light cutting through the darkness. Alexandra made a wish, and though she didn't tell Daniel what it was, he could guess. More of this. More moments like this one. More ordinary, extraordinary days filled with love and laughter and the beautiful mess of family life. It was a wish that would come true. The wedding took place on a snowy December afternoon, just 2 days before Alexandra's Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm. They'd chosen a small venue, a historic chapel in the Swedish countryside, far from the press and the public attention that followed them everywhere. Emma was indeed the flower girl, scattering rose petals down the aisle with the grave concentration of someone performing an extremely important mission. Mrs. Patterson had flown in for the occasion, dabbing at her eyes throughout the ceremony. Lisa Chen served as maid of honor, while Dr. Harrison, the man who had saved Alexandra's life, stood as a witness. And Grant Mercer, of all people, sent a gift, a first edition of The Art of War, with a note that read simply, "You won, well played." Alexandra had laughed when she opened it, and Daniel had known in that moment that something had truly healed, not just her heart, but something deeper. Some wound that had been festering for years, poisoned by isolation and fear, and the belief that she had to face everything alone. The Nobel speech, when it came, was unlike anything the committee had heard before. Alexandra didn't talk about business strategy or technological innovation. She talked about a stormy night and a stranger's kindness. She talked about a 6-year-old girl who offered her stuffed elephant to make a sad lady feel better. She talked about the people who had carried her when she couldn't carry herself, and the lesson she'd learned in the process. "We measure success in many ways," she said, her voice carrying across the grand hall. "Profits, market share, units sold. But the truest measure of success, the one that matters when everything else falls away, is the lives we touch, the people we lift up, the love we give and receive." She looked out at the audience, at Daniel sitting in the front row with Emma on his lap. "I nearly died 2 years ago. My heart was failing, my company was under attack, and I had spent my entire adult life believing that asking for help was weakness. I thought strength meant standing alone. I thought vulnerability was something to be hidden, ashamed of, overcome." Her voice softened. "I was wrong. The night I almost lost everything, I walked through a storm and knocked on a stranger's door. I asked him the most vulnerable question I could imagine. Am I beautiful? Not beautiful like a magazine cover. Beautiful like a human being worthy of love." She smiled at Daniel. He answered yes, not because of my money or my power or my achievements, because he saw me, the real me, scared and broken and desperately hoping that there was still something worth saving. The hall was silent. That's the gift we can give each other, the gift of being seen, the gift of being told that we matter, that we're worthy, that we're beautiful in all the ways that count. Technology can save lives, but only love can make those lives worth living. She raised her Nobel medal. "This award belongs to everyone who refuses to let profit trump compassion, to everyone who believes that health care is a right, not a privilege, to everyone who sees a stranger struggling and chooses to help instead of looking away." She paused. "And to the man who opened his door on the worst night of my life and taught me that I didn't have to face the storm alone." The applause that followed was thunderous. Later that night, in their hotel suite overlooking Stockholm's snow-covered rooftops, Alexandra finally answered the question that had started everything. "You asked me once if I was beautiful," she said to Daniel as they watched the northern lights shimmer across the horizon. "I remember. And you said I was extraordinary, fierce, the kind of person who changes the world." "I meant every word." Alexandra turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw everything, the journey they'd traveled, the battles they'd fought, the love they'd built from impossible beginnings. "You changed me, Daniel Reed, not into someone different, into someone who could finally accept who she already was." She took his hand, pressing it against her heart, the heart that had been broken and healed, that had nearly stopped and now beat strong. "You made me believe I was worth saving, worth loving, worth all of this." "You were always worth it," Daniel said. "You just needed someone to remind you." Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Daddy? Alex? There are lights in the sky." "Northern lights, sweetheart." Daniel lifted her into his arms. "Want to watch with us?" Emma nodded, nestling between them on the window seat. Captain, who had made the journey despite considerable logistical complications, padded over to join them, settling at their feet with a contented sigh. The four of them sat together, watching the aurora dance across the Arctic sky in ribbons of green and purple light, a family that had been forged in storm and struggle, tested by conspiracy and illness, and strengthened by a love that neither of them had expected to find. "Alex?" Emma's voice was drowsy. "Yes, sweetheart?" "You're staying forever, right? You're not going to leave like my other mom?" Alexandra looked at Daniel, then at the little girl who had claimed her heart completely. "Forever," she promised. no matter what. Emma smiled and closed her eyes, secure in the knowledge that some storms bring gifts instead of destruction. And on the balcony of a brownstone in Chicago, in a boardroom where battles had been fought and won, in a hospital room where death had been defied, in every place where their story had unfolded, the answer to the question remained the same. Yes, you are beautiful, you are loved, you are home,